Chapter 106. Night Hut had a helpless expression on his face. Originally, he was eager to send the money over to calculate the accounts, deduct the taxes, and calculate the commission that belonged to him. Then, he would take his soldiers out for a big lunch. Who would have thought that something like this would happen on the way? He also knew that it was completely reasonable for this beautiful lady to refuse to accept the money. After all, if it were anyone else, they would be baffled if someone suddenly sent over a pile of gold coins. God knows if there was some hidden conspiracy behind it, so it was inevitable for them to be cautious. Seeing the situation, Andre didn't care too much. He directly pushed open the door and jumped out of the carriage. With a smile on his face, he walked up to greet Night Hut. "Night Hut, you're really early. I thought you would only appear in the afternoon." "Oh God, Mr. Mage, you're finally here. Otherwise, I thought I would have wasted my trip." Hut excitedly ran over and waved the list in his hand. All the goods had been auctioned off early in the morning. Among them, the silverware was the most expensive. It was sold for a total of 13,200 gold coins. The textiles were slightly cheaper at 7,000 gold coins. All of them reached 90% of the market price. After deducting the 20% transaction tax, there are still 16,000 gold coins left. Including my commission of 4%, that's 640 gold coins. You still have 15,360 gold coins left. In addition to the 19,720 gold coins left after yesterday's tax, there are a total of 35,080 gold coins in the carriage. Other than my commission in the leather pouch, the rest of the goods belong to you. Here are the detailed accounts. Please take a look. If there's no problem, please sign below." As he spoke, he handed over a few pieces of parchment paper and a quill. Perhaps it was because he was about to receive more than 600 gold coins as commission. He seemed to be particularly excited. Andre took a quick glance and directly signed his name at the bottom right of the last piece of parchment paper. He directly handed it back to Hut. This was a property transfer document. After signing it, all the spoils of this mission would be considered finished. As for the ships that were still docked at the port, they would belong to him. In order to encourage merchants and ship owners to actively fight against pirates, Lincoln City had issued many laws. One of them was that if a pirate ship was captured, then whether it was the pirate or the ship, it would belong to him. As long as he didn't sell it, he didn't have to pay taxes. After seeing the clearly visible signature, Hut finally let out a sigh of relief. He hurriedly shouted to the soldiers behind him, "Quickly open the boxes. Let Mr. Mage count the amount." "No need. I don't have time to count tens of thousands of gold coins. Besides, sometimes spells are the best choice." As he spoke, Andre immediately raised his hand and made a standard casting motion. At the same time, he spat out some incomprehensible syllables. A white smoke instantly drilled into the box and circled it twice. Finally, a string of numbers appeared in the air. It was exactly 35080. He was using the rank 0 arcane spell, Magic Trick. Although this spell wasn't very useful against enemies, it was very useful in daily life. It could even create some simple but very useful magical effects. For example, it could levitate half a kilogram of things dirty or clean something, paint it with gorgeous colors, play music out of thin air, make withered flowers bloom again, create a breeze, reflavor unpalatable food, and so on. It could even make some simple little things. Although they were very fragile and could not be used as tools, from a certain perspective, the range of applications was too wide. The premise was that you had to have enough imagination. Just now, Andre had created a cloud of smoke and connected it to his nerves. When the smoke passed through the gold coins, his brain could quickly work like a counting machine. In the blink of an eye, he had counted all the items in the boxes. It was obviously the first time that Hut had seen such an interesting spell. His eyes revealed a trace of excitement, and he exclaimed loudly, "This is amazing! I believe that the people in the city hall will be jealous to death when they see this. Their tax officers are complaining about counting money every day. They're about to collapse, especially those baskets of copper coins. It's just torture." Andre laughed and said in a half-joking tone, I think that the reason why the people in charge of counting money are complaining is because there's too much money that doesn't belong to them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be complaining about being tired. That's right. I didn't feel tired at all when I was counting the gold coins in the leather bags. I can do it again at any time. The sound of these little things hitting each other is the most beautiful music in the world. I feel like I can listen to it for the rest of my life. As he spoke, Hut grabbed the leather bag on the carriage and shook it vigorously. The gold coins inside immediately made a clattering sound. As Linton City was extremely prosperous, most of the people here were money worshippers. For them, money didn't just mean a better quality of life, it was also equivalent to social status and power. For example, the 4 strongest dukes in the city all had their own large merchant guilds. There were dozens of large ships alone, and their annual profits were close to 1,000,000 gold coins. Their terrifying financial resources were almost equal to the annual tax revenue of many traditional feudal families in the inland. It was precisely because the ruling class of the Green Sea Alliance was so rich that they could rely on their loose alliance to suppress most of the surrounding countries and monopolize the lucrative maritime trade. Even the pirate king of the Sardinia Islands was firmly suppressed and couldn't make a comeback. Almost every challenge he launched ended in failure. When he thought of the huge amount of money needed to learn magic, Andre immediately made up his mind to stay in Linton City for a long time. He knew very well that if he returned to the Canteru Kingdom, which mainly cultivated feudal knights, he would never be able to obtain such good conditions. Moreover, as a traditional agricultural country, the Canteru Kingdom's trade was not prosperous. The ruler of the North County, Baron Iverson's annual income was less than 150,000 gold coins. There were only 25 counties in the entire kingdom, and each covered an area of about 2,000 square kilometers. Among them, the North County was the largest because, according to the law, including the Black Forest and the frozen wastelands, it was theoretically under the jurisdiction of the North County. However, the animals and orcs living there obviously didn't think so. Chapter 107. As a man with a mature mind, Andre felt that it was best not to try anything before he was fully prepared. Otherwise, he would most likely die on the way. He had heard too many horror stories about the wild in Linton City. There were stories of gigantic ogres, giants, and shape-shifting monsters that could transform into your closest companions. If you were unlucky enough, you could even see a giant dragon flying out of the mountains or forests. More than 90% of the Oleo continent was still in the era of savagery. There were all kinds of strange creatures, and it was said that there were still giant reptiles from ancient times on a big island in the south. It was very likely that they were the dinosaurs that had gone extinct on Earth 70 million years ago. Andre didn't want to see if his magic could defeat these prehistoric beasts. If he were to fight them head-on, the winter wolves and snow bears alone would be enough to cause him a lot of trouble. Hence, what he needed to do now was to calm down and accumulate his strength. Once he was strong enough, he would slowly find his way home. After night, Hut completed the handover. He quickly led his soldiers and disappeared at the end of the street. Seeing how happy everyone was, it was obvious that they were going to find a tavern to celebrate. As for the carriage and the horse that pulled it, they were all given away as gifts. Even the chest filled with gold coins was left where it was. "Are you daydreaming?" Chloe, who had just come down from the carriage, blinked and asked curiously. "Nothing. Just a little bit of feeling. Let's go." "Aren't you hungry?" Andre said as he stepped forward and gave Elsa a hug. "I hope you have enough food for lunch. I brought a guest back." The young widow noticed the noble girl behind them and nodded nervously. "Don't worry. I made more food today. I'm sure it'll be enough to fill everyone's stomachs. Also, what about the gold coins in the carriage? This is the slum. If we leave them outside, thieves will steal them all. Don't worry about that. I'll let Little Eye stand guard outside. Normal thieves won't be able to steal from under its nose." Andre said as he raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Little Eye, which had just flown out of the carriage, immediately understood and flew to the top of the carriage to guard it. With the help of one main eye and 4 stalk eyes, it could monitor 360 degrees without any blind spots. "Wow, what's this fragrance?" Chloe, whose stomach was already rumbling with hunger, let out a cry of surprise the moment she entered the room. She was obviously starving. If it wasn't for the long-term influence of noble etiquette, perhaps even saliva would have dripped out of her mouth. Today's lunch consists of geoduck seafood soup, pan-fried foie gras, fried fish, stir-fried beef with onions, caviar, stir-fried vegetables, and fresh bread. I hope you like it, Elsa said with a smile. Perhaps it was because she saw the girl's unpretentious naivety. She was not as nervous as she was at the beginning. The atmosphere suddenly became harmonious, and even the little lowly was as reserved as she was outside when she returned home. Her two eyes stared straight at her mother, as if to say, "Why isn't dinner ready yet?" In fact, today's dishes were basically the same as what many nobles ate, especially the caviar, which was absolutely expensive. Just the ingredients for this meal alone cost at least 3 to 5 gold coins. If it wasn't for Andre's repeated requests, Elsa wouldn't have been willing to spend so much money on food. This young widow was still distressed over the amount of money spent on this meal, because she felt that spending more than half a month's worth of food for some so-called delicious food was an act of extreme prodigality. However, Andre's thoughts were completely different. He had enough of the terrible food of this world's lower class. He would rather spend a little more to satisfy his appetite. After all, eating was one of the greatest pleasures in a person's life. Even sex, which intoxicated countless people, was ranked behind it. If one couldn't even satisfy this aspect, then what was the point of living, especially if one's financial ability allowed it? As an old foodie in his previous life, Andre now felt that it was time to pick up the sense of taste that he had abandoned for many years. Otherwise, he was afraid that in another 2 years, his tongue would be completely ruined, and he would never be able to spell out what was delicious and what was difficult to swallow. Chloe was quite satisfied with the dishes at noon. She sat directly at the dining table and said with a face full of anticipation, "Then what are we waiting for? Hurry up and eat. I can't wait to try your cooking. I believe it must be delicious." "Please wait a moment." Elsa lifted her skirt and went into the kitchen. It didn't take long for all the dishes to be placed on the table. The overflowing aroma instantly conquered everyone's sense of smell. Even Eunice, who had always been indifferent, couldn't help but take a sniff. Chloe, who had never been polite, picked up the spoon and took a sip of the seafood soup. She immediately praised loudly. "Excellent. It's 10 times better than the chef at home. I can guarantee that no one in the entire Naples city can cook better than you." After receiving the praise, Elsa's face immediately showed a trace of a smile. She then quickly waved her hand modestly. "No, you're overpraising me. It's my first time cooking such high-quality ingredients. It's already good enough that it's barely edible. Mom, I also think that today's lunch is delicious." Beverly's mouth was stuffed with caviar, and she said with a face full of enjoyment. For her, who was born in a poor family, this was probably the best meal she had ever eaten since she was born. She was so happy that her eyes narrowed into slits. The food in her mouth had to be chewed repeatedly for half a minute before she was willing to swallow it. The little lowly's appearance made Andre feel a little touched. He gently touched the girl's hair. "Eat more if it's delicious. As long as you work hard, I promise that you'll be able to eat it often in the future." "Really?" Beverly's eyes instantly lit up, and she showed a surprised expression. Andre nodded without hesitation. "Of course it's true. When the day you become an official apprentice, I'll prepare an unprecedented feast for you. It'll definitely be 10 times better than today's." According to the system's notification, the faster this little lowly grew, the greater the benefits she would bring to him. A mere meal was nothing. Even if he spent thousands of gold coins on a luxurious banquet, he would still be able to earn more than a loss. "Hooray! Teacher, I'll definitely become an apprentice as soon as possible." The girl excitedly waved her little fist. As soon as her voice fell, a few messages popped up in Andre's vision. "Apprentice intimacy with you has increased by 10 points. Current intimacy is 70. He didn't expect that a mere meal and a promise would buy this little girl over. Chapter 108. No wonder so many strange uncles like to use lollipops to kidnap little Lolis. They were too easy to fool. As long as there was good food and fun, it was almost effortless. Andre felt that at this rate, he would be able to raise his intimacy level to 100 in less than 2 months. When that time came, Beverly would definitely listen to him. When she became a real mage, she would definitely be a very useful assistant. Lunchtime passed amidst chatter and laughter. Everyone ate happily. Chloe claimed that she had eaten twice as much as usual. She leaned against the back of the chair and quietly loosened the strap of her shapewear when no one was paying attention. After resting for half an hour, Andre felt that it was about time. If they did not leave now, they would not be able to reach the manor before dark. Thus, he stood up and suggested, "Ladies, should we set off? According to the markings on the map, it will take at least 3 hours to reach Tua's Valley from Lincoln City. I don't want to travel after dark. That's too dangerous." "Tua's Valley? Why are we going there?" Elsa asked, puzzled. She did not know that Andre had become a baron and obtained a manor as a fief, so her eyes were full of doubts. However, this could not be blamed on the young widow, because the conferment of a noble was a very serious matter. It usually needed to be held on a special day, such as the last day of every month or some festival. 2 of the 4 dukes would preside over the ceremony in the city hall and finally announce this matter to the whole city. But now that the dukes were busy looking for the traitor, they probably did not have the energy to do this. In their eyes, as long as the traitor hidden among the nobles was not caught, it was equivalent to leaving behind a huge hidden danger. If things went wrong, the whole city might be dragged down alive. Don't think that this is a joke. One had to know that Lincoln City was very dependent on maritime trade. The sea routes were equivalent to blood vessels, and a large number of merchant ships were almost like blood. If this traitor handed over the time of the merchant ships to the pirate king of the Sardinia Islands, then with the pirates' ability to come and go like the wind, they could even completely cut off maritime trade in a short period of time. The losses were simply unimaginable. Although the traitor hadn't done such a crazy thing yet, it didn't mean that he wouldn't do it in the future. So, before the dukes found the traitor, they wouldn't have the energy to do anything else. Andre shrugged helplessly and explained, "I completed a mission from the Association of Mages yesterday. Since it was a rather important mission, the City Hall gave me a noble title and a manor. I plan to take a look at it and make some adjustments while I'm at it." "Baron," Elsa couldn't hide her surprise. "Good heavens, why didn't you mention this yesterday?" "No wonder that man sent me several boxes of gold coins." Although the barons of Lincoln City were far inferior to the barons of the inland feudal kingdoms, and their rights were mostly reflected in their social status. Their territories were generally not that big, but they were still nobles and could enjoy many convenient privileges, so she didn't know how to deal with such a situation. So what? It's just a noble title. Many official mages in the Association of Mages have noble titles. On the contrary, the chances of nobles becoming mages are pitifully low. Andre shrugged nonchalantly. To be honest, a mere baron couldn't enjoy as many benefits as a member of the Association of Mages. The former didn't have any judicial immunity or tax exemption. The only useful thing was that they could join the ruling class. However, Elsa obviously didn't think so. Her expression was a little complicated. After a while, she stuttered, Then you guys go. I'll stay and look after the house. There's no need for that. Everyone will go together. Also, stay in the manor for 2 days and breathe in the fresh air of the suburbs." After saying that, Andre grabbed Elsa with one hand and Chloe with the other and walked straight to the door. According to President Boris's hint, something might happen in the city in the next few days. Therefore, he didn't want to leave the young widow alone at home. What if something happened? "Wait, let go first. I have to close the windows and lock the door," Elsa shouted with a slightly red face. It was obvious that she was embarrassed to be dragged out by a man like this. She quickly found an excuse for herself. In a way, she was more introverted than a young girl. In comparison, Chloe was more natural and unrestrained. She even took the initiative to hold Elsa's arm with a slightly mischievous smile on her face. Andre nodded slightly and loosened his grip. "All right, I'll give you 5 minutes. Don't try to delay the time. We won't leave until you come out. Don't worry. I'll close the windows and doors and change my clothes." After saying that, Elsa turned around and climbed up the stairs and went into her room. The others walked out of the door and jumped onto the carriage. As for the carriage with the gold coins, Eunice drove it. Perhaps because she had experienced too much pain as a child, she knew quite a lot of things. Driving a carriage was just one of the many survival skills she had. After waiting for a few minutes, Elsa quickly changed her clothes and walked out of the house. She carefully locked the door and got onto the carriage with Andre's help. After that, everyone headed towards the city gate. When they passed by the city hall, Andre handed over his noble family emblem. It was exactly the same as the tattoo on his hand. After meeting up with the guards and slaves waiting near the city gate, the team of nearly 100 people marched north along the continent. 50 soldiers from the kingdom of Brant consciously spread out to protect the wagons filled with gold coins. They had obviously been tamed by the slave merchants and were loyal to their masters. In Andre's eyes, this was undoubtedly a destruction of human nature. However, he also knew that even if freedom was given to all the slaves now, they wouldn't be able to survive on their own. This was because the slaves in Lincoln City were lifelong. Unless they made enough contributions and were granted the status of a free person by both the master and the city hall, they could only be slaves for the rest of their lives. Andre simply couldn't fight against the strong tradition and system. He could only give them a relatively better life within the limits of his ability. After all, no matter how strong a person was, he couldn't fight against the entire class. That was purely suicidal. Chapter 109. On the way to Tours Valley, Chloe talked nonstop about the knowledge she had learned, giving him one method after another to manage and increase the output of a manor. She was clearly in high spirits today. Not only did she talk about the history of the Green Sea Alliance's transition from a traditional feudal system to a manor system, but she also talked about many interesting anecdotes about the various countries in the South. A manor, as the name implied, was a very primitive economic unit. At the same time, it was also a typical self-sufficient agricultural type. The economic relationship was mainly between the farmer providing the labor and the manor owner providing the land. Generally speaking, there were two forms of cooperation. One was that all the output would belong to the owner, and the farmer and his family would be supported by the manor owner. No matter how the harvest was, they would be able to get enough food and necessities to survive. The other was similar to a rental system, where the manor owner would set a distribution ratio. Usually, at least half of the harvest would be turned over, with some even as high as 80%. The rest would belong to the farmers. In this form of cooperation, the manor owner had the duty to protect the farmers from beasts, monsters, and bandits, while the rest was taken care of by the farmers themselves. Whether it was cloth, experiments, farming tools, or livestock, the farmers had to pay for everything. Even the use of the mill had to be paid a few copper coins. Generally speaking, a manor was equivalent to a closed system, capable of producing food, clothing, tools, and other necessities. There was farmland, the manor owner's mansion, the farmer's residence, woodland, a large pond or small lake, grassland, and so on. Not only did the manor have to grow food, but also had to rear livestock, poultry, grapes, flax, and other cash crops. Of course, the manor owner didn't just collect money. He had to fulfill some obligations while enjoying the benefits, such as distributing land reasonably, providing protection, and enforcing justice. At the same time, he had to maintain the production facilities, such as the mill, brewing equipment, oven, and blacksmith. However, Andre wasn't very interested in the secret method to increase the output of food. He discovered that Linton City was similar to Lonely Mountain Town in terms of agricultural standards. They basically relied on their hands and hoes and didn't even have a basic irrigation system. The harvest was completely dependent on the weather. If it wasn't for the abundant sunlight and rain in the south, they would have gone hungry. In addition, the lack of farming tools was also an important reason, especially since the simple plow had not yet been invented in this world. Therefore, the amount of land that a farmer could cultivate was extremely limited. It was also because of this that the entire Orire was always in a state of semi-starvation, and the supply of food never met the demand. Don't underestimate this. The plow played a very important role in the history of agriculture in the region. Its main function was to turn over the soil, loosen the soil, and promote the aerobic respiration of plant roots, thus helping to absorb mineral elements. Its role was irreplaceable. As a transmigrator, Andre had seen some primitive animal-powered heavy plows in the countryside. Therefore, he felt that as long as the farming tools were slightly reformed and the farmers were taught basic knowledge, such as plowing, fertilization, and rotation of tillage, he believed that the food production would definitely increase by several times. When that time came, they could raise more livestock and poultry to form a complete ecosystem. Just as he was thinking about how to plan and modify it, a guard on a horse ran over and shouted, "Miss, we're here." Not far ahead was Tue's Valley. "Look, that building is the castle blocking the entrance." Following the direction pointed out by the guard, the group quickly saw a 4-story stone castle a few hundred meters away. It stood in the middle of a huge ring-shaped mountain, like a lock that firmly protected everything inside the valley. In order to ensure that no enemy could easily enter, a tall wall was built between the castle and the mountain. It was at least 12 meters high and looked exceptionally majestic and magnificent. Oh my God, this is simply a military fortress. How could the city hall be willing to give it to me? If it was said that the title deed that remained on paper before made Andre excited, now it was only left with excitement and deep doubts. He simply could not believe that such a strategic location would be so easily given to someone else. To put it bluntly, as long as there were 1,000 people here, even if the enemy had 100,000 troops, they would not be able to easily break in. Chloe smiled and shrugged her shoulders as she explained, "Hee, actually it's the opposite of what you think. The City Hall of Lincoln City has long wanted to give this place away. Haven't you noticed? This place is too close to the border forest, and it's equivalent to an outpost against the harassment and invasion of monsters. If anything happens, Lincoln City will immediately send reinforcements, sometimes more than 3 times a month. The officials and nobles have long been annoyed to death. Now that this place belongs to you, it means that you have the responsibility to ensure the safety of this place. It can be said that they've thrown this burden to you." After listening to the girl's analysis, Andre instantly revealed an expression of enlightenment. "So that's how it is. No wonder I always felt that this matter was a little strange. Even if those pirates are a big problem, the rewards are too generous. There's a bounty, a noble title, and even land. Huh. In fact, a few years ago, the dukes had discussed giving this place to a noble, but most people saw through their plans. They would rather choose a small manor near the city than bear such a huge burden. You have to know that raising a private army is a very expensive matter, and there are often casualties in battles with monsters, so no one is willing to take over." Chloe revealed the truth of the matter in an extremely sarcastic tone. She had always had a rather strong hero complex, and thus felt that the nobles of Lincoln City were cowards who didn't even dare to take on the slightest responsibility. An outpost against foreign enemies, huh? Andre shook his head with a smile as he muttered to himself. He found that he really had an affinity with this place. The lonely mountain town that he'd lived in for 4 years was an outpost against the large-scale invasion of the orcs. Now that he'd finally obtained a piece of land, it turned out to be an outpost against the monsters in the forest. However, the only good thing was that the border forest wasn't as dangerous as the dark forest or the frozen wastelands. Most of the monsters that entered the human world were pests like goblins and kobolds. Compared to the ferocious orcs, it was like heaven and earth. An orc warrior could take down at least 5 kobolds and goblins, and with a complete defense system, there shouldn't be much of a problem as long as they were careful. Chapter 110. Actually, being close to the border had its advantages. First of all, there was no need to be afraid of being seen during the agricultural reform. When the time came, all he had to do was to close the castle gates. Surrounded by high mountains, he could directly cut off contact with the outside world. He could completely shut the gates and farm. Secondly, It was not a bad thing to have monsters roaming around. After all, killing could bring a lot of experience points, which was what Andre needed the most. Lastly, only here could he provide better living conditions for the slaves and even give them a certain degree of freedom. If it was in the city, it would definitely attract the attention of countless people. After all, among the universal values of the entire continent, it was normal to treat one or two favored slaves better. However, to treat all slaves the same was purely a mental illness. As a smart man, Andre did not think that he could change the world. Sometimes it was better to keep a low profile. Even if he did not like it, he had to try his best to endure it. It was better to do things that went against the values of most people secretly. Just as they were talking, the carriage finally arrived in front of the castle gates. The patrolling officer, standing on top of the castle, obviously noticed the noble badge printed on the carriage. He quickly shouted at the top of his voice, "I am Lieutenant Wilson, who is stationed here. Please state your name and the purpose of your visit." Andre pushed the door open and jumped down. Without saying a word, he directly cast a mage's hand and sent the title deed and noble certificate to the castle walls. He did not think that his voice could travel that far, especially now that the wind was against him. So, directly taking out the certificate was the wisest thing to do. "Oh gods, so you are the Baron who is here to take over this place. Please wait a moment. I'll have someone open the gates immediately." As he spoke, the officer hurriedly ordered his men to turn the winch to lower the drawbridge. Then, he pulled open the iron gate. After a full 5 minutes, the heavy gates slowly opened. A group of 200 soldiers lined up in a welcoming posture. Not long after, Lieutenant Wilson, who shouted, just now ran out from inside and respectfully saluted. "It's very nice to meet you, Lord Baron. I received the notice this morning, so I have already checked all the supplies. This is the list. Please take a look. At the same time, you can also send someone to check it. If there is no problem, please sign here. We are in a hurry to return to Lincoln City to report." As he spoke, he presented a parchment full of writing with both hands. 240 farmers, a total of 1,430 people, equally divided between men and women, 25 pairs of horses, 600 sheep, 400 pigs, 250 cattle, 2,000 chickens, 700 ducks and geese, 20 dogs. In the warehouse, there are 1,500 bags of flour, 230 bags of other grains, 30 jars of olive oil and honey, 20 barrels of wine, 60 barrels of ale. Andre read it in a low voice as he read it. But when he reached the end, he immediately frowned. Although on the surface there seemed to be sufficient supplies, he discovered that the most important thing was that there were all kinds of military supplies, such as weapons, armor, bows, and so on. As an outpost against foreign enemies, there were hundreds of troops stationed here. How could there not be any reserves? Obviously, there were only two explanations. The first was that the garrison here had secretly sold off the military supplies, and the second was that someone had given them an order to take away all the military supplies. However, Andre felt that he had no conflict with the city hall, and with his status as a mage, he wasn't someone that anyone would dare to provoke. Thus, he felt that something was wrong. A cold light flashed in his eyes, and he directly raised his hand to cast a rank 0 arcane spell, Tremor Shock. Following that, he took out the mithril scimitar that he carried with him, and without hesitation, placed it on the lieutenant's neck. "Speak. Who ordered you to do this? Where are the weapons and armor hidden?" The sudden change of events not only frightened the soldiers, but also frightened Chloe, Elsa, and the little lowly Beverly who had just alighted from the carriage. "Sir Baron, what are you doing? That's right. Please let go of the lieutenant immediately." What exactly did the lieutenant do wrong? Why did you place a scimitar on his neck? In an instant, all the soldiers panicked and spoke up for their superior. They couldn't understand why he had suddenly drawn his scimitar when everything was fine just now. Seeing that the soldiers were getting closer and closer, Chloe's subordinates hurriedly drew their weapons and protected their young lady behind them. The 50 slave soldiers also stepped forward bravely, guarding their master's side. Although they didn't have any weapons in their hands, no one dared to underestimate the valiant warriors from Brant. Just as the two groups of people were about to clash, Andre suddenly extended a finger and shot out a golden cloud. All the soldiers that were enveloped by the cloud immediately let out a blood-curdling scream and threw down the weapons in their hands, squatting on the ground with their hands covering their eyes. Supreme Magical Technique, Silent Spell Release. Rank 2 Arcane Spell, Flash Powder. All targets within the spell's range are blinded. All invisible units within the spell's range are revealed. Looking at the notifications that popped up in his vision, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly, and a cold smile appeared on his face. He then shouted at the soldiers who wanted to cause trouble. All of you, shut up, be honest. Remember, I'm a member of Linton City's Wizard Association. Even if I kill all of you, I don't have to worry about being punished by the law. If you don't want to cause trouble for yourself, then retreat immediately. In an instant, the soldiers who had been aggressive just now suddenly came to their senses. Standing in front of them was not only a noble baron, but also a wizard who possessed supernatural powers. Thus, they hurriedly retreated more than 10 meters, abandoning their comrades who were causing trouble. They knew very well what the Wizard Association meant, so they chose to stay out of the matter without even thinking about it. No one was willing to bear the consequences of offending a wizard. Very good. Go. Capture all the people who stay behind. Andre waved his hand and directly gave the order to the slave soldiers. He was almost certain that there were a few people who knew the inside story among the leaders. Otherwise, they wouldn't have risked their lives to clamor and try to save the hostages in their hands. Understood, Master. A man with a particularly strong physique responded and immediately led the charge. In a few seconds, they had captured the temporarily blind man, and at the same time, they picked up the weapons on the ground and armed themselves. In a short while, the situation was under control. Chapter 111. At this moment, Lieutenant Wilson's face was so gloomy that water could almost drip out of it. His eyes kept darting around. If it wasn't for the fact that the machete on his neck was too sharp, he would have taken advantage of the moment when Andre was distracted to escape from this situation where he was being controlled. Unfortunately, Andre had already trained his sharp eyes and vigilance when he was a hunter. He did not give his opponent any chance to resist. After carefully disarming the enemy, he used the sharp blade to cut open a layer of skin. He asked with a playful look, "Tell me, who asked you to do this? What other tricks do you have? I don't know what you're talking about. Let me go. Even if you have judicial immunity, you can't be so arrogant." At this moment, Wilson was still stubborn and had no intention of confessing. As a high-ranking officer, he did not believe that anyone would dare to do anything to him in public. You're still quibbling. Let me ask you, why are there no military supplies on this list? Where are the backup weapons and armor? Andre said as he waved the parchment in his hand. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that the whole thing was full of conspiracy. It was very likely that the traitor was taking revenge. First, he hid the military supplies in the castle. Then he lured the monsters or used money to bribe the mercenaries to attack and massacre the entire valley. When the time came, all he needed to do was to set a big fire and there would be no evidence at all. His 19 points of intelligence made his logical thinking very clear. It did not take much effort for him to guess the ins and outs of the whole thing. The cold light in his eyes made the surrounding air a little cold. Seeing that his plan was still exposed, Wilson did not show a trace of panic. Instead, he laughed wantonly. Ha 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 ha! You're indeed a genius mage. You can actually find the suspicious points with a list and make a prompt decision to take action. Yes, all of this was premeditated, but you'll never know who my master is. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly slammed his neck against the blade. The sharp mithril scimitar easily cut his neck into two. The head fell to the ground with a grunt, and the blood from the cut instantly flew more than a meter high. Fortunately, Andre reacted quickly, or else he would have been sprayed all over. Such a strange and bloody scene shocked everyone. Elsa and Beverly, the mother and daughter pair, immediately covered their faces and let out ear-piercing screams. For them who lived in the city, It was the first time they saw a beheading. They were quite frightened. Chloe's reaction was slightly better, but her face was a little pale. After all, she had seen more cruel killings on the pirate ship, so she was quite immune to it. As for the ordinary soldiers, they were so shocked that they could not speak. They had just heard their immediate superior admit that he had tampered with the handover process and even mentioned a master. The whole thing was obviously manipulated by someone. Without a doubt, this involved the power struggle of the upper class. They did not want to be involved. So before Andre spoke, all of them threw down the weapons in their hands and raised their hands to prove their innocence. The leader of the guards of the Mariel family glanced at the headless corpse on the ground and immediately took 2 steps forward. He lowered his voice and suggested, "Sir, I think it's best to enter the castle immediately and completely seal the door. Then send a cavalry back to Linton City as fast as possible to report. If there are no accidents, there will definitely be an attack tonight." "You also think that the current situation is not good?" Andre asked expressionlessly. The leader of the guards smiled bitterly and sighed. "This is obvious. According to the laws of Linton City, privately concealing military supplies is a serious crime, especially in such a large amount. It's enough for that lieutenant to be hanged 10 times. The reason he dared to do so is because he was prepared to silence us. Moreover, this guy did not hesitate at all when he committed suicide. There is no doubt that he's a death warrior of some family or organization. The only thing we can't be sure of is whether the enemy is coming for you or Miss Chloe." "Chloe? Could it be that these people are not here for me? What does it have to do with her?" From Andre's point of view, the current situation was clearly the work of the traitor. The goal was simple. It was revenge for what he did yesterday. He did not understand at all. What was so important about a naive and love-struck girl? Perhaps I shouldn't say such things, but the situation is urgent, and I can't care so much about it. The leader of the guard stole a glance at Chloe, who was comforting the mother and daughter. He then explained in a low voice, "The current head of House Mariel, Count Luke of Perry City, has been diagnosed as unable to bear any more children. This means that Chloe is now the only direct heir. Anyone who can obtain her and have children with her will obtain great power and wealth after the Count's death. Many ambitious families are secretly making small moves. Even the collateral branches of House Mariel are itching to make a move." "You mean the pirate attack on Chloe's ship wasn't a coincidence?" Andre immediately frowned. He had originally thought that the whole matter was simple, but after hearing the leader's words, it suddenly became complicated. Not only did it involve the internal problems of Linton City, but the famous House Mariel of the Green Sea Alliance was also involved. Even the goal of the traitor was once again confusing. It was impossible to determine if the traitor wanted more power and wealth, or if he wanted to kidnap Chloe and gain the power of House Mariel. After all, even a fool could see that this noble girl was not too scheming. She had no interest in power and scheming. As long as he could get his hands on her, he would definitely be able to control this huge family in the future. Although it was rare for nobles to take over a magpie's nest, there were still precedents. The leader of the guards took a deep breath and clenched his fists. That's right. That wasn't a coincidence at all. At least not in Countess Anastasia's eyes. She has already found some clues and is digging deeper into the mastermind behind this. Please believe me when I say that this matter is not as simple as it seems on the surface. You must be prepared. Tonight may be difficult. Chapter 112. Without any hesitation, Andre nodded. "Then let's do as you say. First, reorganize the soldiers, equip the slave warriors with weapons and armor, and get everyone ready for battle. I'll interrogate the soldiers who led the riot. Maybe I can get something out of them." "No problem. Leave the defense of the castle to me." After saying that, the leader of the guards bowed and turned around to shout at his subordinates. Very quickly, the panicked soldiers were scattered and the loyal guards were placed one by one. In less than 10 minutes, the army of nearly 200 people was completely reorganized. Clearly, he must have been a high-ranking officer before and was quite familiar with the structure of the army. He understood that ordinary soldiers did not have any opinions at all. As long as the officers were controlled well, this army would be able to form a certain combat strength. Andre knew that time was of the essence. He immediately picked out 2 guards, mounted their horses, and galloped towards Linton City with the letter he had personally written. He had a premonition that the enemy's attack would be very fierce. With the few people he had now, it was simply not enough. At most, he could only buy a little more time, so his only hope was to ask for help. In order to ensure that there were no accidents, he not only asked for help from the city hall, but also wrote a letter to Countess Anastasia. After entering the castle, Andre immediately ordered the gate to be closed, the iron gate to be lowered, and the drawbridge to be put away. After comforting the frightened Elsa and Eunice, he immediately brought the demon bloodline Eunice to the dungeon. The dozen or so low-ranking officers who had led the riot were imprisoned here. 5 fully armed slave warriors were whipping the captives, trying to pry open their mouths to get some useful information. Upon seeing Andre appear, a 1.8-meter-tall, extremely muscular Brant warrior bowed with one hand on his chest. "Master, these guys are very stubborn. No matter how hard we whip them, they refuse to speak. Do you think we can give them a more painful punishment?" Stubborn. Andre frowned and immediately turned his gaze to the hanged and bloody fellows. At this moment, there was not a single piece of intact skin on their bodies. Their backs, chests, buttocks, and thighs were all badly mutilated. Some parts were even swollen and purple. It could be said that if they did not receive proper treatment, they would basically be dead. Don't underestimate whipping. It's just a superficial wound, not enough to be fatal. In fact, it was the exact opposite. Due to the extremely poor medical standards of this world, coupled with the fact that most people could not afford the expensive cost of magic, once the whip wound became infected, even the strong feudal knights would fall seriously ill. As for ordinary people, they could only resign themselves to fate. The mortality rate was as high as 70%, especially in the hot climate of the south. Coupled with the innumerable mosquitoes, such a situation was tantamount to an early death sentence. The warrior raised his arm and pointed at the unconscious captives and explained, "Look, these people have a scorpion tail tattoo on the inside of their arms, just like that Lieutenant Wilson. It's obvious that they belong to some secret organization." "You mean these tattoos are the insignia of some family?" Andre narrowed his eyes and asked in a low voice. The moment he thought of Wilson's sudden suicide attempt, he instantly felt a headache, because the ability to raise men of sacrifice and place them in the army on a large scale was definitely not something that ordinary nobles could do. The mastermind must be very powerful, and it must have been planned for a long time. In short, he was now involved in a huge conspiracy. In fact, because the gods had blocked the direct connection between the gods and the world 600 years ago, most of the gods could only rely on their followers to expand their influence. Therefore, Aurère's conspiracy did not decrease, but had a tendency to spread more and more. Basically, every few years, there would be all kinds of crises in some areas. Some of them were the little tricks of the evil gods, and some were the followers of demons and devils who were robbing the souls of mortals. They used a variety of methods to control large forces. Some liked to use coercion, some were willing to use bribes, and some were just like birds of a feather. Just the number of notorious organizations alone exceeded 50. From this, one could imagine how chaotic the entire continent was. Andre had just entered the civilized society not long ago, so he did not recognize the strange tattoo. Just as he was about to ask something, Eunice seemed to have suddenly remembered something and immediately exclaimed, "Ah, poisonous tailhook? I think we're in big trouble. You know this organization?" Andre immediately turned around and asked nervously. Eunice took a deep breath and nodded gently. "Yes, I've heard about it when I was wandering around. They worship a powerful demon called Tamon and are actively infiltrating the cities of the Green Sea Alliance. They plan to hold a bloody sacrificial ceremony on a specific day to open the door to the abyss and let that terrible demon come to the human world. Damn it, no wonder these bastards are so stubborn. They're worshippers of a demon." The warrior from the kingdom of Brant gritted his teeth and cursed in a low voice. At the same time, the whip in his hand was not idle as it lashed out viciously at the captive. From his hate-filled eyes, one could see what demons were in the eyes of ordinary people. But it was no wonder. Demons and devils were collectively known as the creatures of the lower planes. They belonged to the species that were labeled as evil from the moment they were born. Generally speaking, devils were relatively better. They did not like to use violence, but were willing to make mortals sign contracts through trade and enticement. Once a contract was signed, they would definitely abide by it meticulously. Although devils like to play some tricks in the process, such as deliberately making some patterns on the paper that ordinary people could not understand at all. You might think that it was just decoration, but after signing the contract, you would immediately realize that the patterns on the paper were some harsh additional terms. Although devils were cunning and abominable, they were willing to abide by law and order, which was why they could occasionally be seen in some countries full of tyranny. As for the devil's nemesis, demons were different. Not only were they extremely evil, but they were also particularly willful and reckless. They tore up contracts as frequently as eating and drinking, and there was no credibility to speak of. To a certain extent, they were no different from lunatics filled with the desire to destroy. Chapter 113. Bloodthirsty and cruel, using living humans as sacrifices, slaughtering civilians without restraint, taking their lives and souls. These were the specialties of demons and their worshippers. Sometimes, when a powerful demon passed through the planar channel and entered the Oleal continent, it would often start a large-scale war. Wherever it passed, not even a blade of grass would grow, bringing death and pain to the entire region. More than 300 years ago, there was a demon invasion in the Canteru kingdom. A Glabrizu, who was in the upper reaches of the abyss, used terrible evil magic to sacrifice a whole city of people with the help of his worshippers and opened a portal to the abyss. He led tens of thousands of low-level dretches and quasits and swept through half of the kingdom. In the end, all the temples united and formed a huge army with the kingdom's army. It was said that more than 400 feudal knights died. Even so, the battle was very difficult, and the death rate of ordinary soldiers was as high as 70%. If the Glabrizu had not collected enough souls and did not want to continue fighting, it was not certain who would have won. This war directly caused more than half of the Canteru kingdom to become scorched earth. More than 1 million people died, and the elites of the temples were all lost. There were only 2 or 3 high-level forces left, and they had not completely recovered. Otherwise, the necromancer Ulysses would not have been so arrogant. The destructive power of demons was so great that the temples and rulers of the whole continent had reached a consensus. That was, once there were signs of demon worshippers, they would immediately eliminate them. They would rather kill 1,000 innocents than let one go. It could be said that demon worshippers were either crazy or they were strongly stimulated. For example, they had deep hatred or they were extremely eager to obtain power and power. In short, they had all kinds of flaws, but there was one thing that normal people could not compare to, and that was madness. That's right. Demon worshippers were all crazy. Most of the time, they did not care about their own life and death. In order to please the demons, they would even sacrifice their own parents and children. There was no humanity at all. Well, it seems that I can't get anything out of these guys. Andre sighed slightly, took out his mithril curved sword, and instantly cut off everyone's heads. Hit the vital point. Critical strike activated. Target beheaded. Dead. Received 45 EXP. In the blink of an eye, he had absorbed 280 EXP into the cyst. Then, he immediately ordered, "Take these corpses out and dispose of them. Also, clean up the bloodstains." "Yes, master." The slave warrior did not show any strange reaction to the sudden killing. He bowed slightly and began to put the body down from the high place, as if it was perfectly justified to kill the devil's worshipper. The other warriors also showed good obedience. No one sympathized with the dead, low-ranking officer. After understanding the danger and complexity of the current situation, Andre did not dare to stay for even a moment. He went straight to the top floor of the castle. As soon as he walked out of the staircase, he saw Chloe arguing fiercely with the leader of her guards. "Anthony, I demand an immediate explanation. Why are those guards not allowing me to leave the castle?" The young girl shouted angrily. The guard called Anthony smiled bitterly and spread out his hands. "I'm sorry, Mississippi. This is for your safety. I don't want to do this either. I believe you've seen at the door just now. Someone is targeting us. Maybe when the sky turns dark, someone will launch an attack on this place. I can't guarantee that there won't be enemy spies in the farmstead in the valley, so you must not leave the castle now." Damn it. Why do I always encounter this kind of thing after leaving home? First, Father inexplicably made me come to Linton City. Then pirates. Now, I'm encountering this kind of thing again. Am I cursed by the goddess of misfortune? Perhaps due to the shock, Crowley appeared to be a little hysterical. Her entire person seemed to have gone crazy as she waved her small fists and pounded Anthony's chest. However, her strength was too weak, and the guard leader didn't even have the intention to dodge. He could only helplessly allow his miss to vent her anger. Seeing this scene, Andre knew that he had to come forward to ease the tense atmosphere. He quickly walked forward, grabbed the young girl's hand, and pulled her into his arms. He softly comforted her. "Calm down, don't be afraid. With me here, no one can hurt you." Chloe's emotions were a little out of control. When she saw Andre, she immediately said excitedly, "My hero, you're finally here. I need your hug and kiss now." "As you wish, beautiful lady." In order to calm the young girl down, Andre went all out. Not only did he hug her tightly in his arms, but he also kissed her soft and tender lips. Under the gazes of countless people, the two of them kissed each other passionately like a man and woman in love. After a full minute, they reluctantly separated. Perhaps the kiss just now worked. Chloe's mental state finally calmed down. She lay quietly on Andre's chest, like a quiet kitten with a faint blush on her face. Smelling the faint fragrance of a young girl, Andre chuckled and asked, "How is it? Do you feel better now? Anthony is doing this for your own good. Don't throw a tantrum at this time. Be good and stay with Elsa and Beverly. No matter what happens, don't step out of the room." "Okay, I'll listen to you." Chloe stood on her tiptoes obediently and gave him another kiss. Then, she trotted all the way and disappeared at the end of the stairs. She looked like a young girl in love. As long as one was not a fool, one could tell that she was in love. As the leader of the guards, Anthony took a deep breath and bowed slightly. "Thank you very much for coming in time. Otherwise, I wouldn't know how to deal with this situation. Miss Chloe's character is very simple and stubborn. Even Countess Anasta of West Xia couldn't do anything to her. Yes, it's because she's very simple that so many people have their eyes on her. For this reason, they didn't hesitate to set up such a big trap. Have you heard of the poisonous tailhook? Those officers and First Lieutenant Wilson have the same mark on them. Maybe we should check all the soldiers in case of any." Andre sighed and put forward his own suggestion. Although he didn't think that there would be any devil worshippers among the remaining ordinary soldiers, there were always exceptions. There was no harm in being careful. Chapter 114. After all, it was going to be dark soon. Who knew when a group of mercenaries or monsters would rush out? If there were a few spies at this time, the scene would be too beautiful. Poisonous hooktail. When Anthony heard this name, his face changed instantly. He quickly lowered his voice and said, "Are you sure it's them? These fellows were all lunatics." A few years ago, a terrible thing happened in Naples City. More than 30 young women died, naked in a farm in the suburbs. When they were discovered, they were completely naked. Their necks had been forcefully broken, and there were traces of their lower bodies being violated. Judging from the extent of their disfigurement, it was obvious that it was not done by humans. Moreover, a few of them had big bellies. In the end, when they were cut open, they found that the stillbirths inside had tails and horns. In the end, it was found that the whole thing was done by an organization called Poisonous Hooktail. They seem to be creating mixed-blood demons. You mean there are living demons among them? Andre was keenly aware of the whole thing. Since this organization wanted to create Taffrin, there must be a male demon in charge of mating. However, The bodies of most humans were not strong enough, and it was difficult for them to successfully give birth to the offspring of powerful creatures. In addition, demons were violent by nature, so the entire plan failed completely. All the women were killed to silence them, a typical act of a lunatic. Anthony obviously knew this kind of thing very well. He touched the thick beard on his chin and shook his head with a wry smile. It's hard to say. Because the demon worshippers have many cruel and bloody rituals, they can let the terrifying creatures from the abyss temporarily descend into this world. So, I don't think they have the ability to open a plane channel. Otherwise, it would be more serious. I hope so. Before the enemy arrives, I need a quiet environment to prepare spells. The job of guarding the castle is all yours. If there's nothing particularly important, you can deal with it yourself. Andre rubbed the space between his eyebrows. Ever since he had gotten his hands on the level 3 magic scrolls, he had not had the time to learn them. Now that the battle was imminent, he had to quickly copy them into his spellbook, especially the fireball spell and the lightning spell, which could deal damage in a large area. They could be very effective in a group battle. No problem. There were currently 150 to 160 qualified soldiers in the castle. Coupled with the terrain advantage, even if thousands of people came, they would be able to hold on for some time. In addition, I've also sent people to the villages in the valley to recruit militia. At most half an hour, at least 200 more people will arrive. Anthony patted his chest and made a promise. As a bodyguard of a great noble family, he had received a lot of training, one of which was his understanding of spellcasters. Therefore, he knew very well that mages would usually leave a few empty spell slots so that they could adjust before the battle. After all, to most mages, every single spell slot was extremely precious. Moreover, there were just too many types of arcane spells. Sometimes a targeted spell in battle could often achieve twice the effect with half the effort. Thus, it was a habit to leave a few empty spell slots unmemorized first, and adjust according to the enemy's weaknesses when discovering them. However, this bodyguard leader definitely wouldn't have guessed that the reason why Andre had empty spell slots was that he hadn't learned any level 3 spells. He had only memorized a level 2 spell for silent casting, Flash Powder. As for the other 2, they were still empty. However, he had no intention of explaining. After smiling slightly, he turned around and left the top floor of the castle. He plunged into his room and took out a few level 3 magic scrolls to start learning. Very quickly, he was attracted by the powerful arcane spells one after another, completely forgetting the time. Smelly Cloud spell can create a large area of foul-smelling gas. Anyone who accidentally inhales it will feel dizzy, nauseous, vomiting, and in serious cases, will fall into a coma. This is an extremely useful spell in group battles, especially when used with bows and arrows. Imagine when the enemy was lying on the ground in discomfort while you killed the enemy with arrows from afar. How relaxing would that be? Wind Creation spell. As the name suggests, it creates a strong gust of wind. Not only can it be used to accelerate the spread of fire, but it can also be used together with the Smelly Cloud spell to let the disgusting gas affect more people. Fireball spell, the most frequently used level 3 arcane spell, and at the same time, the most well-known. Its power is basically equivalent to an artillery shell or a grenade, with a killing radius of about 5 meters. However, most of the damage methods are flames and explosions, so its power is quite impressive. Haste spell. This is an extremely powerful support spell. It can greatly increase the movement and attack speed of any target, and its reflexes will also be strengthened accordingly. Anyone affected by this spell will have their fighting strength increased by at least 2 levels. Lightning spell. A powerful bolt of lightning shoots out from the caster's fingers, causing terrifying damage to all targets in its path. If it hits an insulating object, such as a wall, a tree, etc., it will bounce back. In narrow places, it can often cause continuous and huge damage to the enemy. Fly spell. After successfully casting, the target will temporarily gain the ability to fly. Although its speed is far inferior to that of birds, It is absolutely invincible against ordinary people who can't even fly. Dispel spell. Dispels the active spells on a single target, including mage armor, haste spell, fly spell, and so on. However, there's an obvious flaw, and that is that there is no way to distinguish which spells are beneficial and which are harmful. All spells are treated as the same person, and are often used in battles between casters. In addition to the above scrolls that he bought from the Mage Association, Andre also found 2 level 3 arcane spells in Ulysses' scroll folder. They were Suggestion Spell and Monster Summoning Spell 3. The former could affect a person's mind, causing them to listen to the caster's commands for a short period of time. The duration was 6 seconds for each mage level, and if he cast it now, it could last for more than half a minute. The latter was a summoning spell. It could summon a fire-breathing hellhound to fight for the caster for 24 hours, which was a whole day. However, the cost was that the caster would not be able to cast any other summoning spells for 3 minutes. After copying all these powerful arcane spells into the spellbook, he began to concentrate on memorizing them. Considering that there might be many enemies, the Stinking Cloud spell was a must. The other one was a level 3 monster summoning spell, and not the famous Fireball spell. Chapter 115. The most important thing in a defensive battle was not a short burst of power, but a long period of time. Therefore, a fiery hound was obviously much more useful than a one-time explosion. After all, a hellhound could provide continuous combat power. If necessary, it could even be sacrificed to buy time for everyone to retreat. As for the remaining level 2 and level 1 arcane spells, Andre mostly chose to cast control and support spells, such as Web, Fear, Grease, Prismatic Spray, and so on. They could be of great use in battle. Just as he was about to cast a spell, there was a sudden knock on the door of the room, followed by a man shouting nervously, "Your Excellency, we have discovered an unidentified army heading towards the castle. There are at least 2,000 of them. Mr. Anthony asked me to inform you that the battle is about to begin." Hearing this, Andre suddenly stood up from his chair, pushed open the door, and ran straight to the top floor of the castle. He knew very well that this was the mastermind's killer move. The enemy outnumbered him by several times. Although Tue's Valley was famous for being easy to defend and hard to attack, the situation was not optimistic. Although the demon worshippers were crazy, they were not stupid at all. Instead, they were very smart. Since they knew the geographical advantage of the valley, they must have made corresponding preparations. Tonight would be a tough battle. Andre did not feel the slightest ripple in his heart regarding the battle that was about to begin. He was as calm as an outsider. As a villager who had lived in lonely mountain town for 4 years, he was already very familiar with war. Almost every winter, he would fight with the orcs a few times before he would put down a boulder to block the road. It was said that this was done to ensure that the villagers' combat power did not decrease. It was important to know that the orcs did not only come in 1 or 2,000, but also 8 to 10,000. Therefore, he was already used to being surrounded by a large number of enemies. A mere 2,000 was not enough to scare him. As soon as he reached the top floor of the castle, Anthony walked over and pointed at the flames in the distance. "Do you see that? Our enemies have finally appeared. If I'm not wrong, they should be a tribe of barbarians living at the edge of the forest. The flag in the middle of the army is their totem, but it's still a little far away, so I can't see it clearly. More than 2,000 barbarian warriors? It seems that the culprit behind the scenes has really put in a lot of effort. I wonder how much he has paid to move a powerful tribal chief." Andre narrowed his eyes and murmured to himself. Barbarians, as the name implied, were a group of humans who lived a very primitive and barbaric lifestyle. They were very widespread in Oraire, from the cold frozen wastelands in the north to the tropical rainforests in the south. It basically existed in the form of tribes. They were brave and fierce, but because they were too ignorant, they were not accepted by the civilized world. It was just like how the ancient world on Earth was divided into humans and barbarians. Only those who accepted the rule of the country and paid taxes were accepted as citizens. These barbarians, who relied on fishing and hunting for a living, wandered on the edge of civilization. Sometimes they would trade furs and other things with merchants for some ironware and daily necessities. Other times, they would attack cities and towns to plunder wealth. Fortunately, the barbarians would not massacre civilians. Most of the time, they would return to the forest after looting, so the rulers did not see them as a threat. Most of the time, they would be expelled. In some places, the nobles would even pay the leaders of the barbarian tribes to fight for them. It was clear that these people in front of him were hired. The culprit behind the scenes had really put in a lot of effort to achieve his goal. Although Andre still did not know why the culprit had done so much, he did not have time to think too much about it. The 2,000 barbarians were already in formation. It seemed like they were ready to attack. Andre quickly cast a permanent arcane spell, mage armor, on himself and asked, "How many people do we have? How many crossbows do we have? How many arrows do we have?" The guard leader glanced at the nervous soldiers around him and sighed. "Sigh. Right now, there are only about 200 of us who can be of use. Most of them have been through at least 5 battles and are considered elite veterans. The remaining 220 peasants have no experience in battle. Their weapons are mostly pitchforks and sickles. They're good for show, but they won't be of much use in a real battle." Speaking of which, he turned around and pointed at the slaves who were ready for battle. "As for the long-range weapons, I only found 30 composite bows and more than 20-foot operated crossbows. They have all been handed over to the warriors of Brant of the Grassland Kingdom. They are the best archers, but they only have less than 2,000 arrows. Those damn bastards have hidden the other military supplies deep in the mountains behind the valley. We can't even find a can of kerosene now." First, they hid the weapons and armors. Then, they took away all the soldiers. Finally, they let the 2,000 barbarians attack in one go. The enemy's plan is really complicated. If nothing goes wrong, we're dead for sure. It's a pity that they thought they were smart enough to make a list. Otherwise, I wouldn't have noticed the problem. A cold light flashed in Andre's eyes as he spoke. There was no doubt that the mastermind behind the scenes would want to silence all witnesses after delivering the fatal blow. The servants in the castle and the farmers in the valley would be slaughtered to the last. Otherwise, the entire Linton City and even the Greensea Alliance would be shaken. When that time came, an extremely severe blow would be dealt. Such a vicious plot had ignited the flames of anger in his heart. He swore to himself that he would strike back at the enemy. Not only would he completely crush this plot, but he would also find the mastermind behind it. Although Andre didn't like to find trouble for himself, the enemy had crossed the line this time. In his eyes, the lives of the commoners in this world were miserable. They ate the worst food, paid high taxes, and occasionally faced the attacks of bandits, beasts, and monsters. Some poor places couldn't even afford to eat black bread. A famous bard once mocked that the poor peasants only had 2 kinds of food throughout the year. One was porridge in the form of wheat paste, while the other was porridge in the form of wheat paste. It sounded exaggerated, but in reality, the situation was much better in the south. After all, there was plenty of rain and sunlight. In the north, especially in a place as cold as Lonely Mountain Town, the food production was shockingly low. If not for the abundant prey in the forest, they wouldn't even have enough porridge to fill their stomachs. Chapter 116. Andre, who had experienced it firsthand, knew how hard it was to live at the bottom of society. He had a strong sympathy for the kind-hearted commoners. Therefore, he hated the act of massacring the commoners. Therefore, he would definitely make the other party pay the price if he encountered them, a very painful price. While the two were conversing, the barbarian army stopped about 200 meters away from the castle. They were all dressed in coarse animal hides and wielded all sorts of weapons. There were axes, spears, war hammers, long swords, meteor hammers, and so on. They were no different from a motley crew. Right in front of him, a majestic feline was drawn with red paint on a huge piece of animal skin. It looked a little like a tiger and a little like a lion, but it had 2 more legs than normal animals and strange tentacles on its back. It was obviously not an ordinary beast. Seeing the barbarians standing still, Andre asked curiously. What are they doing? Are they going to hand in a letter of challenge? No, they're waiting for their leader to come out and persuade them to surrender. According to barbarian tradition, they must give their enemies a chance to surrender before they attack. Those who surrender can keep their lives, but they will be demoted to slaves at the cost of their lives. These barbarians worship strength and honor, so try not to provoke them when you answer them. Otherwise, they will attack even more fiercely, Anthony explained in a low voice. In fact, even though the barbarians looked very primitive and backward, unable to even form a basic formation, in a real battle, they were often able to defeat opponents several times their size. Sometimes, even the charging cavalry would be restrained. From this, it could be seen how strong their individual combat power was. If not for the fact that the structure of society was too primitive and could not even make decent metal weapons, the barbarians would have already swept across the continent and established a powerful primitive civilization. A few minutes later, a burly man with a full beard and a height of more than 2 meters squeezed out of the crowd. He held 2 heavy battle axes in his hands and wore a bearskin cloak. He roared at the top of his voice, "People on a castle, listen up. I'm the leader of the great Shift's tribe, the powerful August king of the barbarians. I will now benevolently give you 5 minutes to open the gates and surrender. Otherwise, all the men who participate in this battle will be killed. Remember, you only have 5 minutes." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly swung the axe in his right hand and threw it out. Everyone only heard a bang as the huge axe embedded itself into the cracks in the rocks above the castle. It showed the owner's terrifying arm strength and eyesight. Even the eyes of the old soldiers guarding the castle showed a trace of fear. He's at least a rank 8 barbarian warrior. We're in big trouble. Anthony's face was so gloomy that it was almost dripping water. Don't panic. We still have the geographical advantage. The entrance to the valley is so small. No matter how many people they have, they can only send out 1 or 200 people at a time. The rest can only watch from behind. Anyway, what we need to do now is stall for time. When the reinforcements from Lincoln City arrive, none of them will be able to escape. Andre had never thought that he would be able to kill all 2,000 of these ferocious barbarians. His goal was clear from the start, and that was to hold on until reinforcements arrived at all costs. If they really couldn't do it, they would abandon the castle and play hide and seek with these fools with the advantage of darkness. Anthony smiled bitterly and shook his head. I know what you're thinking, but if a rank 8 barbarian warrior personally leads the charge, we won't be able to hold on at all, especially when he activates his berserk state. He's as terrifying as a charging knight captain, and his sharp intuition allows him to deal with multiple enemies at once. I'm afraid I won't be able to hold on for even a minute. Don't worry, I have a dozen special arrows here. Distribute them to the best archers. If he dares to charge personally, take aim and shoot. I want to see if he can withstand the power of the wolf poison grass. Andre said as he took off the quiver on his body and handed it over. This was the leftover from his mission. The poison of each arrow was enough to kill 10 horses. Even if the barbarians had an extraordinary physique, they would still fall to the ground obediently. The more they activated their berserk state, the faster they would die. Oh, damn it, these are poisonous arrows. It'll cause a huge uproar if they're discovered, Anthony reminded in a small voice after taking a look at them, his face full of shock. Dipping their weapons in poison had always been something that the nobles strongly resisted. Apart from a few thieves and assassins who walked in the shadows, very few were willing to do so. This was because if they were discovered, their reputation would be tarnished, and they might even lose their noble titles. A huge uproar? Andre laughed disdainfully. Don't worry, the dead don't speak. Moreover, the other party is a group of barbarians who aren't protected by the law. Even if they know, who would dare to stand up for them? After all, these barbarians are now related to demon worshippers. Even a mastermind behind this wouldn't dare to act rashly. As a pragmatist, he didn't care about the so-called style of the nobles. It was fine as long as they could kill their enemies and protect themselves. Besides, What was the difference between using a sword and using poison to kill? Perhaps he wouldn't mind abiding by the established rules under normal circumstances. However, if he still persisted in these so-called rules at this moment of life and death, then he wouldn't be far from death. Sigh. All right, I'll distribute all the poisoned arrows to the warriors of Brant. Anyway, they like to dip their arrows in poison. I believe they won't mind too much. Seeing that Andre had made up his mind, Anthony passed the poisoned arrows to the temporary leader of the slave soldiers. The latter cracked a smile and directly inserted 5 arrows into his quiver. At the same time, he passed the rest to the others. The grassland kingdom of Brant often fought with orcs, goblins, and ogres. As a result, they developed a habit of using unscrupulous means. Their wind cavalry would shoot a few rounds before engaging in battle, then switch to spears, scimitars, and other weapons for close combat. Therefore, it was normal to tamper with the arrows. Just as the poisoned arrows were distributed, a desolate horn sounded from outside, followed by the deafening sound of war drums. Boom, 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 woo. The barbarians shouted and sang an ancient war song. They raised their weapons and roared towards the sky. The battle was finally about to begin. Chapter 117. Everyone prepare to defend. Archers, fire at will. Remember, don't let them climb up the walls. Otherwise, you will soon know how terrifying the destructive power of the barbarian warriors is. Seeing that the first wave of enemies had easily crossed the deep ditch in front of the castle, Anthony immediately began to shout at the top of his lungs. As a former military officer, he knew very well that the first wave was very important in a defensive battle. As long as they could survive, the rest would be a battle of attrition. On the contrary, if they couldn't withstand it, then they would undoubtedly be killed by the enemy in one wave. As for Andre, he also made a prompt decision and immediately began to chant an incantation. In the blink of an eye, he completed a level 2 arcane spell, Bull's Strength, and directly cast it on the body of the guard leader. A dazzling light flashed, and the muscles all over his body quickly swelled up. Just by looking at it, one could tell that it was full of explosive power. The effect of this spell was to increase the target's strength by 2 to 6 points randomly. Every mage's level could increase the duration by an hour. This also meant that for 6 hours, Anthony was equivalent to a Hercules with strength far exceeding that of a normal person. He could completely crush those normal barbarian warriors. After all, he was currently the highest level in the castle. The warrior's level should be between level 5 and 6. In an intense battle, he would definitely be the mainstay, so a little bit of strengthening was necessary. It must be known that the military commanders in Orire were not like those on Earth, who could only hide in the rear and command wretchedly. They often had extraordinary strength, and once they joined the battle, they would definitely look down on everyone. It might be a bit of an exaggeration to say that one person could fight against 1,000, but one person could definitely fight against 10 or even 100 people. Feeling the powerful strength contained in his muscles, Anthony's face instantly revealed a look of surprise. He muttered to himself, "This is the power of magic. Too great. I feel that my strength has almost doubled." No wonder those grand knights could even split the deck of a ship with a single sword under the support of magic. So it's the effect of magic. That might not necessarily be an arcane spell. It could also be a divine spell. After all, arcane spells in the end are more inclined towards killing, summoning, and controlling, while divine spells are more focused on support and healing. Let's teach those barbarians a lesson and let them know that this place won't be taken so easily. After saying this, Andre began to chant again, not holding back at all as he used the rank 2 arcanist spell, Fireblade technique. The guard captain's long sword seemed to have been ignited as a tongue of flame suddenly burst forth, tightly wrapping around the sharp blade. The bright light of the flame was extremely conspicuous in the darkness, continuously emitting a terrifying heat. That was not the end of it. In order to increase Anthony's combat power, he also cast a spell called Mage Armor. With the support of these 3 spells, Anthony's whole body shone with a strong magical light. From afar, he looked like a huge light bulb. If the barbarians did not have any long-range weapons like crossbows, he would not have been able to survive a round of attacks. However, these spells didn't go to waste. Bull's strength allowed the user to easily overwhelm the opponent in close combat. Fireblade allowed the user to wield a weapon even more threatening. Once the user was stabbed, the burning pain was absolutely unbearable. As for the final Mage's Armor, it provided a layer of invisible force field. Together with the breastplate, it allowed the user to resist some ordinary weapons. As a warrior who was in the middle of the ranks of his profession, Anthony had never enjoyed such treatment. He felt that he was invincible now. He raised the flaming longsword in his hand and shouted, "Open your eyes! Kill all these barbarians! Kill them all! Slaughter them all!" In an instant, all the soldiers were conquered by the incredible power of arcane magic. They exploded with high morale. Even the farmers who were originally afraid calmed down a lot. In their eyes, mages and gods were almost the same. Both of them were using methods that they could not understand at all. Just as the people on top of the castle were waiting, a group of valiant barbarians stepped on the ladder and rushed through the bottomless trench. They shouted and rushed up, each of them with a ferocious expression. It was as if what stood in front of them was not a sturdy castle, but a warehouse full of supplies. The temporarily appointed leader of the Brant warriors raised the corner of his mouth slightly, and a cold smile flashed across his face. He quickly took out an arrow and pulled the bowstring without hesitation. He aimed at the barbarian at the front and suddenly released his finger. Whoosh! The sharp arrow instantly drew a straight line and pierced the barbarian warrior's throat. It had to be said that this guy's physique was indeed extraordinary. He actually managed to run a few more steps before falling to the ground with a plop. This arrow was like a signal that opened the prelude to a fierce battle. The rest of the Brant warriors pulled the crossbows in their hands and aimed at the barbarians. In the blink of an eye, a third of them were killed, and many of those who were still charging had arrows stuck in their bodies. However, as long as their vitals were not hit, these valiant barbarian warriors continued to charge without fear. It was as if death was nothing to them. What a group of fearless warriors. I'm starting to like these barbarians a little, Andre muttered to himself and started chanting again. His hands flew up and down, making extremely complicated movements. One could only see a gorgeous radiance forming a complex and mysterious pattern between his fingers. In just a few seconds, these patterns started to reflect a strong red light. Then a huge black dog with flames coming out of its mouth jumped out of the strong light. Its terrifying sharp teeth made people feel cold all over. Without a doubt, this was the hound that lived in hell, the devil's good friend, the hellhound. It was a pure purgatory creature with a violent and ferocious nature, but it was loyal to its master. Although it looked very dangerous, in reality, other than being a little bigger and being able to spit out cone-shaped flames from its mouth, it was not much different from a normal large hound. It could be killed by standard weapons. However, everyone knew that dogs could often display unexpected power in a chaotic battle, especially this kind of otherworldly beast that could bite a person's neck in half. Go, fight the enemies that climb up. Andre did not hesitate, and quickly gave the order to the hellhound to attack freely. He was very clear that he did not fully understand the habits of these purgatory creatures, so it was better to let them do as they pleased. After all, in battle, the hunting instinct of animals was far more direct and effective than the intelligence of humans. Chapter 118. Woof, woof, woof. The hellhound barked twice, faithfully carrying out its summoner's orders. It dashed to the front, pouncing on a barbarian who had just climbed up. Before the barbarian could react, it opened its bloody mouth and bit down on his neck, shaking its head violently. The surrounding people only heard a cracking sound, and the unlucky barbarian's neck was bitten off. Fresh blood quickly flowed to the ground. Summoned creature. Hellhound has dealt a fatal blow to the target. Dealt 25 damage to the barbarian warrior. Target's neck has been bitten off. Killed. received 70 EXP. In an instant, the system faithfully made a record shocking. The soldiers guarding the city looked at the large dog with ecstasy, because it had used its actions to prove who it was helping. As for the barbarians, they cried out in fear, "Evil magic!" These despicable bastards actually used magic to summon evil spirits. In truth, although the barbarians were very brave and valiant, they had a very fatal flaw, and that was their superstition. They only believed in the strength of their muscles and weapons, and were disgusted and repelled by magic that they did not understand. At the same time, they were also afraid. Thus, when they discovered a mage in battle, there were usually two situations. One was to flee in panic, and the other was to madly charge forward until all of them died or the mage was killed. The current situation was obviously the former. Many of the charging barbarians did not say anything and turned to run. Perhaps they could calmly face swords, but they would not allow themselves to be killed by magic. According to ancient legends, the souls of those who were killed by magic would never be able to rest in peace. It had to be said that these people were really ignorant. When all the countries and cities in the continent were supporting magic, they actually saw it as a disaster. It was no wonder that they were chased to the harsh environment of the barbarians. However, there were also barbarians who did not believe in superstition. At least 50 of them climbed up the ladder without fear of the Hellhound, directly activating their berserk innate abilities. In a few seconds, they killed 7 or 8 soldiers. Their strength was obviously much greater than the normal soldiers. As long as the weapons of both sides clashed, the ones who were forced back or had their weapons knocked away were without exception the soldiers of Lincoln City. Ha 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 ha! Come on, you cowards hiding behind the city walls. Have a taste of Old Barlow's club. An old man, who looked to be in his 50s and was covered in scars, laughed maniacally as he waved his mace. It was as if he was invincible. The 6 soldiers were beaten to the point where they could not fight back at all. They could only raise their shields to protect themselves. Seeing this situation, Anthony immediately realized that the other party must be an expert. Immediately, he turned around and rushed back. Without hesitation, he brandished his flaming long sword and hacked down. Even though this weapon was most suitable for stabbing, with the effect of bull strength, he chose to meet force with the thick spike club. Bang! With a muffled sound, the barbarian's weapon was sent flying. He stared at his hands in shock, his face full of doubt and confusion. It was as if he wanted to know why the power he was so proud of was so weak. But Anthony obviously wouldn't give the enemy too much time to think. With a flash of crimson flames, the old barbarian's head was chopped off, and the aroma of meat wafted out from a wound. After killing the enemy, he lifted the enemy's head high and shouted, "Did you see that? This is the fate of the invaders. As long as I'm here, no one can take down this castle. Long live! Chase these enemies down the walls. Kill, kill, kill. Barbarians are nothing to be afraid of." The leader of the guards used the simplest and most violent method to display his strength. This caused the morale of the soldiers to soar once more, and at the same time, it also dealt a heavy blow to the arrogance of the enemy. After 10 minutes, all the barbarians who had rushed up the walls were either killed or crippled. The first round of attack finally ended with the victory of the defending army. As the last barbarian fell from the top of the castle and was nailed to the ground by a sharp arrow, the battle finally came to an end. More than 100 barbarian warriors had died in the attack, and some of them had been scared away by the summoned hellhounds. As for the defenders, more than a dozen of them had their heads smashed or their hearts pierced. Around 30 of them had their arms and legs broken. Blood and screams could be heard everywhere. Due to the poor medical system of the Olyre continent, in the absence of divine healing, the only way to keep these people alive was to use a red-hot iron to cauterize their wounds. Not only could this prevent infection, it could also stop the bleeding quickly. The downside was that it was too painful, and any normal person would probably faint from the pain. "Buddy, please count when you do it. I'm afraid of pain," a soldier who had lost his right arm said bitterly. The militiaman with the fiery red branding iron nodded lightly. "Bear with it for a while. It'll be over in a few seconds." After he finished speaking, he immediately signaled to 3 people behind him. They quickly held down the injured soldier and stuffed a piece of wood into his mouth to prevent him from biting off his tongue in the pain. Without any hesitation, the hot iron was placed directly on the wound, and the sizzling sound of meat being roasted could be heard. Soon, a wave of fragrance wafted from the top of the castle. As for the wounded, they all let out heart-wrenching screams. More than 90% of them fainted, and some even urinated and defecated. After the bleeding was stopped, they were all carried to the rear to recuperate. In the end, whether they could survive or not depended on their own willpower. After all, the number of divine spell users was not much higher than the number of arcane spell users, and the price was expensive. Even a level 0 divine spell would cost 50 gold coins. Unless one was a melee fighter above level 5, there was no way they could enjoy the treatment of divine spells. In the eyes of the rulers, their lives were not worth that much money. Looking at the busy crowd around him, Andre sighed slightly, and his face was full of worry. Although he already knew that this battle would not be easy, he was still shocked by the terrifying power of the barbarian warriors, especially in the chaotic battle. These warriors were so powerful and skillful that they were like meat grinders. Normally, it would take at least 3 soldiers to deal with one of them. Their combat ability was probably 1 level higher than that of a level 1 professional warrior. No wonder they could fight head-on with the cavalrymen. Andre could not understand it all. They were all human beings, but how could the barbarians be so different from the people living in the cities and villages? It was as if they'd been injected with hormones, and all of them had exaggerated muscles. Chapter 119. There were only about 250 soldiers who could actually fight. 50 of them were slave soldiers from Brant, and their main job was to use bows and crossbows. There were also about 170 soldiers from Lincoln City who were originally stationed here. They were equipped with spears, swords, and shields, and they were in charge of dealing with the enemies who climbed up the ladders. Finally, there were the guards that Crowley had brought from Morant. At the same time, they were also the group with the strongest fighting strength. There were only about 20 of them, but all of them were at the warrior level. They were able to fight evenly with the valiant barbarians one-on-one. However, the 50 barbarian warriors had killed and crippled the same number of soldiers. Even though most of them were ordinary soldiers trained by Lincoln City, they had still used up a fifth of the defensive force. As long as the enemy was willing to pay the price and attack a few more times, they would be able to break through the castle, even if they had the help of magic. After all, Andre was only level 6, and he only had 16 spell slots. It wasn't enough to change the outcome of a battle where the difference in strength was too great. Of course, he still had some high-grade magic scrolls that he got from Ulysses, but he wouldn't use them unless he had no other choice. Magic scrolls of level 3 and above were too precious. The Lincoln City Mage Association only sold level 3 magic scrolls to ordinary members. Level 4 magic scrolls had to be promoted to senior members, and level 5 magic scrolls could only be copied by President Boris. So far, only a few senior members had received 1 or 2 from him. In Andre's opinion, if the scrolls in his hands were discovered by others, they would immediately attract the attention of countless mages. The evil spellbook that couldn't be opened was priceless, especially the necromancy spell that could extend one's life by taking over one's body and devouring one's soul. It was an irresistible temptation to any spellcaster. Although in this world, the priests claimed that as long as mortals gave up their faith, they would be able to continue living a good life in the kingdom created by God after death. However, to all intelligent creatures, death was still an extremely terrifying thing. Basically, they would try their best to avoid it and live as long as they could. In this aspect, the nobles and merchants were the most obvious. On one hand, they donated a large sum of money to the temple, hoping to receive better treatment after death. On the other hand, they desperately tried to find ways to slow down their aging and prolong their lifespan. For this, they did not hesitate to do things that angered the heavens. For example, They bathed in the blood of some noble women, and some people were tempted by demons and demons to secretly carry out bloody, sacrificial rituals. Similar situations emerged endlessly on the road. As for the mages, they had even more means. Body modification, life-prolonging potions, all kinds of magic rituals, and trading with dragons, heavenly creatures, demons, devils, and other powerful creatures. There was nothing that one could not imagine, nothing that they did not dare to do. However, these methods could only prolong one's lifespan for a while. There would always be a day when one's lifespan would come to an end. Generally speaking, one's lifespan would not exceed 200 years. It was impossible to achieve true immortality. There were also some particularly powerful mages who did not hesitate to give up their human identity and transform themselves into vampires, shadow creatures, elemental creatures, half-purgatory creatures, half-heavenly creatures, and so on. However, the price for all of these was not small. Vampires and shadow creatures would be eroded by negative energy and would become more and more evil. Half-purgatory creatures would also be affected by their bloodline. If they were to transform themselves into half-heavenly creatures, they would definitely be hunted down by the temple of good gods. The only seemingly harmless elemental creatures were also very dangerous. Let's take the simplest example. Let's not talk about the complicated magic rituals needed to change one's physique. If a mage said that he had transformed himself into a fire elemental, then his entire body would constantly emit flames of about 1,000 degrees. Although the power of the fire elemental would often be doubled when casting fire elemental, he would not be able to use any water elemental magic. Furthermore, if he was not careful, he would hurt ordinary people. The wind elemental, water elemental, and earth elemental all had their own flaws. They would often become more and more indifferent, and eventually, without exception, they would all break into the elemental world. All in all, until now, Ulysses' method of prolonging his life was the safest method that Andre knew. At the same time, it could also maintain the identity of a human. Compared to the Lich transformation during the prosperous era of the magic civilization, it could be said that it was on par with the Lich transformation method. He could even imagine that if the news were to leak out, perhaps half of the continent's mages would come to snatch this evil spellbook, and whether he was willing or not, he would become the center of the storm. I can't use high-level magic scrolls so easily. For safety's sake, Andre silently set a rule for himself in his heart. Just as he was thinking about how to deal a heavy blow to the enemy, there was a sudden commotion among the barbarians outside the city. Following that, a few people who were not very strong and had colorful facial makeup walked out. They first lit a bonfire, then formed a circle and sang loudly in a language that no one could understand. At the same time, they danced a strange dance. In just a few minutes, a strange gray energy was formed. Seeing this scene, Anthony's expression changed instantly. He quickly ran to the side of the wall to take a closer look. After a while, he muttered to himself, "Damn it, there's a witch doctor among them. These people are casting spells. If I'm not wrong, they must be summoning some kind of totem monster." Witch doctor? Totem? Andre's sharp senses picked up on these two keywords, and he frowned as well. That's right. Those dancing people are witch doctors. They are a group of barbarians who have the ability to cast spells. Although they don't have powerful destructive powers like the mages, they have a more mysterious power. According to the traditions of the barbarians, every tribe has its own guardian spirit. Some of them were normal animals when they were alive, while others were magical beasts. However, after a long period of primitive worship, they have all mutated to a certain extent and can bestow some strange abilities to their followers, Anthony explained patiently. Although his level of knowledge was not high, he had a wide range of experience and could say many things clearly and logically. He must have been to many places when he was young. It was no wonder that he was the leader of Chloe's guards. It should be known that the great nobles attached great importance to their personal safety. Normally, those who could become their personal bodyguards were all feudal knights. On one hand, they were powerful in combat and could even use their bodies to block ballistas when necessary. On the other hand, Knights had received etiquette education and knew when to behave properly. Whether it was attending banquets or formal occasions, they could ensure that they would not be rude. Chapter 120. As an unorthodox warrior, Anthony had undoubtedly relied on his rich experience to defeat countless elegant knights. He could deal with all kinds of sudden situations, and his judgment of the enemy was also very accurate. He knew when to fight and when to run, and was most suited for the job of a bodyguard. Just as Andre was about to say something, a tall and sturdy barbarian warrior walked out from the crowd. He didn't speak, and directly knelt in the middle of the bonfire, his face full of anticipation. A few witch doctors shouted a strange name, and the energy gathered in the air quickly formed an energy vortex. Not long after, a translucent shadow darted out from the center of the vortex. It had the body of a leopard, 6 legs, and 2 strange tentacles on its back. Under the guidance of the ritual, the soul of this monster drilled into the target's body. In a short moment, a black cloud appeared around the barbarian warrior. Then, a look of pain appeared on his face, and his entire body curled up. Not long after, his face changed. The swollen face quickly twisted, turning into the shape of a cat. His body also elongated, and his hands and legs turned into claws. A few minutes later, this strong barbarian warrior had turned into a monster from head to toe. Even his soul and consciousness had not been wiped away. The surrounding barbarians all knelt down and worshipped the totemic guardian beast of their tribe. There was no doubt that the poor warrior had been sacrificed, used as a vessel for the beast's soul. Damn it, they're too barbaric. They actually let a monster devour the soul of one of their own. After seeing this strange scene, Andre could not hide his shock. As a mage, he knew the cruelty of this matter better than anyone else present. The disappearance of the soul was different from the death of the body. It meant that a person had completely disappeared from the world. They could not be summoned by any spells, nor could they be resurrected by high-level divine spells. Even the gods could not do anything about it. In a sense, this was true death. The whole process was extremely painful, and this could be seen from the way the barbarian warrior had curled up his body. Anthony took a deep breath and explained bitterly, because they are barbarians, a barbarian tribe that believes in primitive totems. Be careful. All the guardian beasts have strange abilities. I've seen deer that can spit fire, brown bears that have immense strength, and giant wolves that emit lightning. To ordinary soldiers, they're like invincible monsters. Once they charge into a crowd, they can instantly cause terrifying area damage. Oh, sounds like a magical beast. I wonder what this monster in front of us knows. Andre narrowed his eyes as he stared at the feline that was about 3 meters long and weighed about 200 kilograms. His nerves quickly tensed up as he sensed danger from the halo around the feline's body. The monster seemed to be very sensitive to magical energy. It stared with its gem-like eyes and opened its mouth to reveal its sharp fangs. Damn it, this guy seems to be very intelligent. With the help of the light from the bonfire, Anthony also noticed that something was amiss and immediately lowered his voice to remind Lindley. However, the moment the last word was uttered, the strange-looking feline instantly disappeared. In the next second, it suddenly appeared beside Andre, pouncing forward like a leopard. Its claws, fangs, and the 2 tentacles on its back attacked at the same time. It seemed like it wanted to get rid of the enemy that was the biggest threat to it first. Woof woof! The Cerberus, who had been following by the side, faithfully carried out its duty. Without saying a word, it rushed out and knocked the Cerberus away. It opened its mouth and spat out a fan-shaped flame, instantly turning a large area in front of it into a sea of fire. Fortunately, there were no soldiers around, or else they would have been roasted alive. When a flame was over, everyone was shocked to find that the monster that had launched the sneak attack had disappeared. Not even a strand of hair was left behind. A sharp-eyed soldier pointed at the barbarians in front of the castle and shouted, "Look, it's there." A 6-legged feline was staring fiercely at the hellhound from afar. At the same time, it let out a series of provocative growls. There was not a single wound on its body. It was obvious that it had returned to its original position the moment it spat out the flame. Gorgeous blue-black fur, a long and slender body like a feline, a meat pad with a horn at the end of its tentacles, and the ability to teleport freely. I think I know the true identity of this monster. Andre narrowed his eyes and muttered to himself. He had read a lot of books in Ulysses' private library, and there was a series of books called Monster Illustrated Handbook that recorded many strange creatures. But because the pictures were slightly abstract, he couldn't recognize them immediately. Anthony, who had seen the monster's terrifying ability with his own eyes, quickly asked in a low voice, "Tell me, what is it? It can actually cross such a long distance in the blink of an eye. It's really scary." Andre gently rubbed his eyebrows and replied softly, "Displacement beast, a supernatural creature that has the ability to travel freely in the air. It can be said to be very difficult to deal with. Do you see the halo around its body? In fact, it's a kind of refraction of light. The monster we see now is only an illusion. Its real body is hidden around 10 meters away. Your consciousness is saying that it can teleport. It can come as it wishes. It can leave as it wishes." Anthony's eyes revealed an unconcealable fear. As a warrior, he knew all too well how troublesome this kind of enemy that could come and go freely was, especially when it came to sneak attacks. It was simply impossible to guard against, and if the enemy couldn't hit him, he could immediately escape. That's right, I can't restrict its movement for now, so we have to be careful. If we can't severely injure or kill it in one go, I'm afraid there won't be a second chance. After saying that, a cold light flashed in Andre's eyes. In his eyes, no matter how smart or powerful an animal was, it was just an animal. As long as it didn't have the ability to think like a human, then it would definitely be killed or even captured by a hunter. The only problem now was what kind of trap to kill it in one shot. Just as the two were talking, the barbarians once again formed a small engineering team of about 200 people and rushed into the valley. This time, they were much smarter. Each of them held a simple wooden shield in their hands to block the arrows. Chapter 121. While the two were talking, the barbarians once again formed a small engineering team of around 200 men, charging into the valley. They had learned their lesson this time, and each of them held a simple wooden shield in their hands to block the arrows. Staring at the approaching enemies, Anthony clenched his teeth and cursed. Damn it! These barbarians reacted so quickly. I'm willing to bet that someone is giving them ideas. There's no need to dwell on this now. After all, there's a mastermind behind all of this. Otherwise, these barbarians wouldn't have appeared. I'll cast an oil spell in front of the walls in a moment, and have all the archers pay attention to those who slip and fall. The battle had developed to this point, and it was no longer something anyone could control. Andre could only do his best and leave the rest to luck. If they could hold on until the reinforcements from Lincoln City arrived, then everything would be fine. But if they couldn't, then they would have to consider some extreme measures. Flour and olive oil could also be used as weapons of mass destruction if used properly. He'd already ordered his men to prepare some not too far away. If the situation became critical, they could immediately deal a devastating blow to the enemy. The barbarians' charging speed was fast. Without heavy armor, they were much faster than normal soldiers, and their steps were light. They charged through the trench in a few minutes and entered the range of the crossbows. However, the warriors of Brant, who'd already received orders, were not in a hurry to start shooting. Instead, they patiently adjusted their breathing and silently waited for an opportunity. Andre was on guard against the sneak attacks of the displacement beasts while he silently watched the barbarians approach under the cover of their shields. When they were 50 meters away from the castle and the walls on both sides, he instantly entered a state of casting and quickly cast a rank 1 arcane spell, Oil. A small ball of black matter shot out from between his fingers and landed on the ground. With a plop, it formed a large patch of black oil. The barbarians at the front were careless, and they all slipped and fell to the ground. Those following behind were also tripped, causing great chaos for a moment. Seeing that the enemy's rhythm had been completely disrupted, Anthony immediately raised the flaming longsword in his hand and yelled, "Shoot! Shoot with all your might! Son of a b******. Die, all of you!" The slave warriors sneered and cursed as they aimed at their vitals and opened fire. Due to the close distance, the power of the arrows was greatly increased. They killed at least 30 enemies in one round of attack, and another 20 or so were killed in the second round. A quarter of the barbarians who had rushed into the valley had died before they could even climb the walls. However, Andre wasn't satisfied with this result. He immediately ordered the militia behind him, "Fuel! Pour all the boiling olive oil down." "Yes, Your Excellency." The captain of the militia in his 40s patted his chest hard and hurriedly commanded the reserve team, made up of young farmers, to lift the boiling cauldrons and rush to the city wall, directly throwing the cauldrons out together with the oil. The boiling oil fell from the sky and splashed onto the barbarians, causing them to scream in pain. The boiling pot was not bad either, directly smashing the heads of 2 unlucky barbarians. It was obvious that they were not going to survive. "Give me the torch." Andre smiled coldly and stretched out his right hand. The captain didn't dare delay and quickly handed over a pine oil torch. "My lord, this is what you wanted." Even though these honest peasants were a little unwilling to be conscripted in a battle, their obedience to the nobles was already engraved in their bones. They didn't have the slightest thought of resisting, and even if they were scared to death, they still resisted and didn't dare to run away. However, Andre didn't have the time to care about what the militia was thinking. He took the torch and threw it down from a high place. He was very clear that although it was a little inhumane to force the farmers into battle, if the castle was breached, then none of the residents inside would be spared. Rather than be inhumanely slaughtered, it was better to fight to the death here. When the fire met the boiling oil, a huge fire instantly burned fiercely below the castle. The surrounding weeds and shrubs became the fuel for the fire, and in a few seconds, it turned into a purgatory. 5 points of fire damage to the pirates. 2 points of fire damage to the pirates. 2 points of fire damage to the pirates. 3 points of fire damage to the pirates. A large amount of information was faithfully recorded in the retina. After a while, many of the people who were injured by the arrows finally exhausted all their vitality. Their eyes gradually lost their light, and they lay motionless on the ground. It had to be said that the barbarians' vitality was indeed tenacious, and their will was firm. Many of them were covered in flames, but they still roared and climbed up the ladder, wanting to drag a few people down with them before they died. Such a fierce scene shocked the defenders from the bottom of their hearts, especially the farmers who had never experienced war. Even the hands holding the forks were trembling. Andre didn't dare to imagine what would happen if these 200 people climbed up the ladder. The best-case scenario was that more than half of them would die, and the remaining people wouldn't be able to withstand the next attack. Sure enough, a smart mind and a large amount of knowledge are the most important things. Brute force may be able to show off for a while, but in the end, it will fall under the feet of wisdom. After secretly sighing, he glanced at the information in his retina. He found that the fire just now had brought him more than 3,000 experience points, and the undistributed experience points had accumulated to 8,400 points. It could be said that it was a big harvest. The flames and arrows gave the brave barbarians a head-on blow. At least 140 of them didn't even have time to climb up the ladder before they died at the base of the wall. However, there were still more than 60 people who rushed up the wall. They roared and launched a fierce attack on the soldiers on the wall. In the blink of an eye, more than 20 people were knocked down to the ground. Because most of the barbarians' weapons were axes, thick clubs, and heavy war hammers, the chances of surviving a direct hit were very low. In addition, they were extremely strong, so even if they were wearing armor, they wouldn't be able to survive. After being smashed by the war hammers, several soldiers' chests caved in, and they directly lay on the ground motionless. It was obvious that the broken ribs had pierced into their hearts and killed them. Of course, this wasn't the worst way to die. The unlucky ones who were hit in the head were the most tragic. It was like a watermelon that was smashed by a stone. Red and white instantly flowed all over the ground, and the thick smell of blood could be smelled from more than 10 meters away. Many of the militia couldn't help but vomit when they saw this scene. Chapter 122. Anthony had long predicted that normal soldiers would not be a match for the barbarian warrior, so he brought his guards to block the gaps. Whenever they saw that the barbarian warrior could not hold on any longer, they would immediately rush over to help. Fortunately, the castle and the walls on both sides were not very long, otherwise they would be exhausted to death. As for Andre, he had summoned the hellhound and carefully watched the shifting beast in the distance, always on guard against the sneak attack of this vicious and cunning monster. He was very clear that a magical creature with supernatural powers like this was not something that normal soldiers could deal with. As the only mage, he had to find a way to get rid of it. However, teleportation abilities had always been the most difficult to deal with among all magical abilities. Even if an advanced mage came, it would take a lot of effort to take it down. This was because it was mentioned in the Monster Illustrated Handbook series that the teleportation ability of the shifting beast was different from magic. They did not need any incantations, casting actions, or preparation time. With just a thought in their minds, they could instantly teleport thousands of meters away, or even tens of kilometers away. It was a classic example of a creature that could come and go as it pleased. One had to know that if a mage wanted to have a similar spell, they would need to have at least a level 5 arcane spell. This was the spell that Andre had used to escape from the underground. Normally, only a level 9 mage could barely grasp it. Casting it not only required complicated gestures, but also a long incantation. Normally, it was only used for traveling. Using it in battle was purely suicidal. This showed how difficult it was to deal with a magical creature with this ability. As the shifting beast's teleportation did not require preparation time, it was basically impossible to defeat it with magic. This was because the moment it discovered that an arcane spell was cast, it would immediately escape the attack radius. When the spell lost its effect, it would return to launch a sneak attack. Even if one learned a spell to block the teleportation ability, it would not be of any use. Fortunately, this shifting beast that had taken over the barbarian's body seemed to be very afraid of the hellhound. After launching a sneak attack, it stood in the distance and looked at the castle, not launching a second attack. Who knew if it was waiting for a better opportunity, or if it did not want to meet force with force, even though it seemed harmless now? Andre did not want to wait any longer. After all, there's an old saying that one could be a thief for 1,000 days, but who could guard against a thief for 1,000 days? After all, a person's ability to withstand pressure was limited. It was fine to be highly focused for 10 to 30 minutes, but after a long time, one would definitely feel tired. If the opponent chose to launch a sneak attack during this time, then he would definitely be caught off guard. Thus, it was best to immediately set up a trap and then purposely expose a flaw to lure the shifting beast to attack. Even if it could not kill it, it could at least severely injure it. Otherwise, the soldiers would not be able to withstand the next round of attacks without the help of arcane spells. Without any hesitation, Andre shouted at the militia, "Go to the back and give me a few bags of flour. Hurry!" Flour? The captain, who was in his 40s, had a puzzled look on his face. He had no idea what they were going to do with flour on the battlefield. However, his obedience to the nobles had already seeped deep into his bones. In the end, he nodded his head and said, "All right. Although I don't really understand what you're going to do with the flour, you're the lord of this place. Remember, once you bring the flour over, open the seal. If you see that monster appear again, don't be careless. Just sprinkle the flour around it. This is a very important matter, and you cannot make any mistakes. Do you understand?" Andre was afraid that the soldiers would not pay enough attention to this matter, so he reminded them with a serious expression. The captain felt the seriousness of the problem and immediately patted his chest. "Understood. Leave this matter to me. Isn't it just sprinkling flour? Us soldiers may not be good at fighting, but we're good at work." Having said that, he immediately led 40 men to the back of the castle and brought out 20 bags of flour. They opened the bags and poured the flour into wooden basins, which were distributed to the soldiers. In a short while, more than 200 peasants each had a wooden basin of flour in their hands. They were just waiting for the order to sprinkle the flour. Everything was ready. André immediately gestured for the people around him to move away, leaving a large empty space. He then pretended to close his eyes and began to chant a spell. As for the Hellhound, it was purposely sent to the front lines to tear apart the barbarian warriors. On the surface, it looked like he was in a state where he had no protection. Those who had a little understanding of mages knew that when they were focused on casting spells, these fellows who had great supernatural powers were actually at their weakest. Once they were attacked, it would lead to a series of disastrous consequences. The scariest of all was the backlash caused by the failure of the spell model construction. If it was light, they would vomit blood and fall to the ground. If it was heavy, they would explode into pieces with a bang. Perhaps the displacement beast's intelligence wasn't enough to understand this, but the barbarian witch doctors would definitely remind him. They often had conflicts with the army of Lincoln City, so they had fought with mages many times. They knew the weakness of this profession. In order to fool the barbarians, André was really preparing a spell, not pretending. It was just that he had chosen a relatively simple level, one arcane spell, prismatic spray. Thus, he completed everything in a few seconds. However, he didn't release it. He deliberately made it look like his body was surrounded by magical energy, as if he was preparing a powerful arcane spell. It had to be said that although prismatic spray was only a level, one arcane spell, the light effect after it was completed was very intimidating. The seven-colored light flickered in his palm, and many of the soldiers who were fighting with their lives on the line felt that the mage behind them was about to unleash a powerful spell. It was as if they had taken stimulants, and their morale soared in a short period of time, forcing the barbarians back a dozen steps. The barbarians had a fearful and disgusted attitude towards magic, and didn't have much understanding of magic. Thus, in their eyes, if the preparation time was so long and the light was so blinding, it had to be a powerful spell. Thus, a witch doctor hurriedly knelt on the ground and prayed to the tribe's totemic beast, passing on his thoughts to it. Although the displacement beast was very cunning, it was far from being an intelligent creature. It was far inferior to the winter wolves, so after hearing the witch doctor's prayer, its eyes flashed with a trace of light, and it disappeared from the spot. The next second, it suddenly appeared less than a meter away from André, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. It wanted to kill the person who posed the greatest threat to it. André, who had been waiting for a long time, suddenly opened his eyes. A cold smile flashed across his handsome face. "My apologies. You've been tricked. Have a good taste of the feast I prepared for you. Sprinkle the flour." Chapter 123. As soon as he finished speaking, a rainbow light gushed out from between his fingers, accurately covering the strong light and illusion created by the displacement beast. The main body was immediately affected by the spell and stopped attacking for a moment, stupefied on the spot. Seeing this, the captain, who was about 40 years old, immediately shouted at his subordinates, "Idiots! What are you waiting for? Hurry up and spread the flour." The militiamen who were awakened by the scolding scattered the flour in their wooden basins into the air. Due to the special terrain of the Tuays Valley, the wind blew in from the outside during the day, but it was the opposite at night. A large amount of flour was scattered into the air with the help of the wind, surrounding the shifter beast in the middle. André did not hesitate and quickly completed the next arcane spell, Burning Hand. A bright flame shot out from his palm and shot forward, instantly igniting the flour in the air. Boom! Following a deafening explosion, a gigantic orange-red fireball soared into the sky. It could even be seen from a few kilometers away. The powerful shock wave blew the soldiers on top of the castle to the ground, and many barbarians who had their backs against the walls fell to their deaths. Shock! Everyone was stunned by the sudden explosion, The militiamen who had been blown to the ground by the shockwave were even more stunned. They could not believe that the flower in their hands could cause such a terrifying explosion. In reality, flour was a very terrifying weapon. When it was scattered in the air at an extremely high density, it would burn completely as soon as it came into contact with a flame, causing the air to expand rapidly. Its power was not inferior to any gunpowder. On Earth, there were many cases of flour warehouses exploding, and the scene was unbelievably hot. As soon as the flames dissipated a little, the hellhound quickly got up from the ground and pounced on the dying beast. It opened its bloody mouth and bit down on the beast's throat, shaking its huge jaws as it tried to tear it apart. Andre endured the soreness in his body and sat up with difficulty. He muttered to himself, "This power is amazing. If I can return to Earth one day, I'll have to thank my high school chemistry teacher. If he hadn't done a flower explosion experiment, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to deal with this guy today." After saying that, he struggled to get up from the ground and touched his bald hair and eyebrows. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. Obviously, the explosion just now had burned off all the hair. Although the fire resistance of a robe successfully prevented most of the flames from getting close to the robe, causing the robe to not burn too badly, flammable things like hair still couldn't escape the disaster. Fortunately, this was only temporary. He should be able to recover in a few months. As for now, it was better to be a monk for a period of time. Explosion dealt 30 points of damage to the possessed shifting beast. The target has suffered heavy injuries and is unconscious. Summoned creature, Cerberus has dealt a fatal blow to the target. Dealt 18 damage to possessed displacement beast. Target's neck has been bitten off. Death. Obtained 2500 EXP. Attention! The soul of the displaced field is leaving the body. As the system prompt appeared on the vision network, especially when he saw the last message, Andre quickly stood up and stared at the black-red burnt corpse. He saw a translucent shadow gradually emerge from the corpse and slowly float into the sky. It looked like it wanted to break free from the shackles of the body. However, in the state of a spirit, it seemed to have lost the ability to teleport instantly. It could only rely on the power of the soul itself to escape. Woof, 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 woof. The Cerberus was a special species from the hell of Bator. Like the devils, it was especially sensitive to souls. It immediately began to bark wildly, reminding the summoner that the enemy should escape. Of course, Andre couldn't let the soul of the displaced beast escape just like that. He directly ordered the magic pet to attack through the telepathic connection. Small Eye didn't say anything and immediately flew over from the front line of the battlefield. A dazzling white light was emitted from the main eye and instantly burned the soul. The displaced beast opened its mouth and let out a silent cry. The extreme pain was clearly shown on its face. Obviously, this was the ability that the Eye of Pearl could only learn after reaching level 6, Damage Ray. Not only could it simulate the effects of many spells, but it could also shoot out various energy rays. The white light, just now, was a typical special energy ray. It was very harmful to the undead. Just one ray had dimmed the light of the soul by a lot. It was estimated that another 2 or 3 rays would be able to completely kill it. The soul of the displaced beast was obviously aware of this. Its 2 eyes showed fear and begging. It obviously knew what it meant for the soul to dissipate. In addition, it had been worshipped by the barbarian tribe for a long time. It had long lost the original ferocity of a beast and only wanted to maintain its current state and continue to live. Seeing this situation, the corner of Andre's mouth rose slightly. A smile that was difficult to detect flashed across his face. He took out a piece of black crystal from his waist bag. "I know you can understand my words. Listen carefully. Now I'll give you a chance to live. Go into this gem yourself, and I'll spare your life. If you don't go in, then you'll immediately be killed by the next ray." Although he really wanted to know how much EXP he could get from killing this guy, it was a pity that Little Eye's damage ray could only shoot out 2 rays a day. He could only change it to threats and intimidation. The scientific name of the black crystal was smoky quartz. It was a kind of translucent quartz stone with spots and colors. Only those that were pure black were called black crystals. It was said that it had a very strong conductivity of negative energy and was often used by necromancers to imprison souls. This also meant that once the soul entered the black crystal, it would not be able to escape unless it used a targeted arcane spell. The shifter beast could feel the attribute of the gem against the undead. For a moment, it was very hesitant. Its two gem-like eyes kept flashing. Sometimes it would look at the black crystal, and sometimes it would look at the small eye floating in the air. After a full 5 minutes, the desire to live finally prevailed. With a whoosh, it drilled into the black quartz stone. Looking at the soul that was wandering in the black crystal, Andre finally let out a sigh of relief. He carefully put it into his waist bag. He was really afraid that this guy would fight to the death and run away without a care. After all, the ability to teleport was too frightening. Once the barbarian, witch doctor, held another ritual to find a new carrier. That scene was too beautiful. He didn't even want to think about it. Chapter 124. However, Andre had obviously neglected the importance of totems to primitive tribes. The moment the barbarians saw their own totems enter the gem, they all went crazy. "We must kill that Magus. He imprisoned our guardian beast soul." A witch doctor shouted with his blood-red eyes. The other witch doctor's reaction was even more intense. He took out a bone dagger and slashed his own chest, leaving a bloody mess as he roared at the top of his lungs. Ah! Not only did he want to kill that sorcerer, moreover, he wanted to wash the valley with blood. Only destruction and death can wash away such humiliation. To witch doctors, totems were their spiritual faith and sustenance. At the same time, they were also the source of power. Only those tribes with a long history could raise beast souls with supernatural powers. Every single one of them was very precious. If they were captured or killed, it would often lead to the collapse of the entire tribe, or even the destruction of the tribe. One of the main reasons the Shifts tribe had over 2,000 strong barbarian warriors and controlled the richest hunting grounds was because of their powerful beast souls. Their ability to teleport was especially hard to defend against, making them invincible in a chaotic battle. That was why the Shifts tribe swore to take back their beast souls as soon as possible. Oh, go on. Give the order. There are no cowards in the Shivs. As long as you give the order, I will immediately lead my men to kill all those cowards who only know how to hide on the city wall. A tall and sturdy warrior shouted while patting his chest. The eyes of the burly man, known as Ogre King, were filled with haze. He raised his head and glanced at the pile of corpses below the castle. Then he took a deep breath and swung his axe to the side with all his strength. Everyone only saw a flash of cold light, and the tree that was as thick as an adult's thigh was directly cut down, falling to the ground with a creak. After doing all this, he raised his battle axe high and roared angrily. "Shame! What an unimaginable humiliation! Don't you feel ashamed?" The adept on the other side had used evil magic to kill hundreds of brave warriors. At the same time, he also imprisoned our beast souls. I now announce that the entire army is to attack. They would use the blood and death of the enemy to wash away the humiliation of the Shifts. Go, brave warriors, kill every living thing in sight. Otherwise, we will become the laughingstock of the other barbarian tribes. Kill them all. Kill, 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 kill. The honor of the Shifts shall not be tarnished. In an instant, all the barbarians were enraged. These barbarians who worshipped strength and honor were never afraid of death. On the contrary, they were more afraid of losing their honor or being called a coward. For this reason, they would not hesitate to shed their last drop of blood. From a certain point of view, they were overly emotional and would often erupt into fierce conflicts over trivial matters. Perhaps they would draw their swords and kill people over a quarrel. No wonder they were called barbarians. After a short period of gathering, the remaining 1,600 barbarians rushed forward, not caring if the narrow valley entrance could fit all of them. They rushed towards the castle like a tide. Anthony had just killed the last wild warrior on the wall when he saw this scene. His face changed, and he muttered in a trembling voice, Damn it, were these guys crazy? They're all charging up. How unlucky. It looks like we won't be able to hold on until reinforcements arrive. A guard shook his head with a bitter smile as he sat on the ground, panting. His eyes were filled with despair. Good heavens, it was too terrifying. Are we all going to be chopped into meat paste? No, I don't want to die. God, please come and save us. The terrifying number of barbarians charging at the castle put a lot of psychological pressure on the soldiers. In addition to the heavy casualties from before, many of them were showing signs of collapsing. Panic quickly spread through the crowd, and even the militia who had not participated in the battle were affected. Andre glanced at the barbarians that filled the valley. Not only did he not show any signs of panic, he even narrowed his eyes and smiled coldly. He asked the crestfallen Anthony in a low voice, How many hours has it been since the messenger left? It should be close to 5 or 6 hours. If Lincoln City sent out cavalry, they should be here soon. The guard leader replied bitterly. He had thought that with the pace of the attack, it would not be a problem to hold on for 6 hours or so. Who would have thought that this group of barbarians would suddenly go crazy and come all at once? Even though the valley limited the number of soldiers, many of the defensive weapons had been hidden away. They could only watch as the barbarians climbed up. Once the number of barbarians reached a certain level, the defending army would undoubtedly collapse. After all, the barbarians' individual strength was much stronger than normal soldiers, and they were especially adept at chaotic battles. With the same number of barbarians, they could easily crush the defending army. It was only a matter of time before the castle fell. If that's the case, then get someone to bring out the flour. Even though I don't like killing, these barbarians are too insensible. It's time for them to pay for their foolish actions. A cold light flashed in Andre's eyes as he spoke. Without a doubt, he was planning to use the flower bombs to create a terrifying massacre. Based on the density of the barbarians, a large-scale explosion could kill at least a few hundred people and severely injure thousands. Anthony suddenly thought of the flames and shock waves on the castle walls. His eyes lit up. You're saying that we can repeat that explosion a few more times? Andre nodded lightly. Of course. Not only can we repeat it a few more times, but we can also amplify the power by 10 or even 100 times. Let's hurry and prepare before they reach us. If we're late, then, before he could finish his sentence, a large cloud of dust suddenly rose from the horizon, and a large group of cavalry appeared. They were all clad in armor, and the person at the front held up a flag with the symbol of Lincoln City, which shone with a golden shimmer under the moonlight. Gods above, reinforcements! Reinforcements are here! A sharp-eyed soldier shouted excitedly. Don't be happy too early. Everyone, pick up your weapons and prepare for battle. They'll take some time to arrive. We have to hold off the barbarians' crazy attacks first. Although Anthony secretly heaved a sigh of relief, he still maintained a stern tone. He knew that this was the most dangerous time. The barbarians who had their retreat cut off would definitely attack crazily, so he had to be on full alert. Chapter 125. The Tuays Valley was actually a basin surrounded by mountains. The entrance was in the shape of an inverted trapezoid, and the further one went in, the narrower it became. The castle was built in the narrowest place, and the walls on both sides were no more than 150 meters. In front of the castle, there was a bottomless trench that was several meters wide. It was used to block the enemy's attack, and could only be entered through a drawbridge. This also meant that if the attackers invested too many troops, they would instantly jam the distance between the valley entrance and the trench. Not only would they become targets for arrows, but it would also easily cause chaos. If the people in front did not move fast enough, they would definitely be squeezed into the trench by the people behind them and fall to their deaths. To some extent, as long as there were enough soldiers stationed here, there was almost no possibility of being breached. Of course, in Andre's opinion, the two sides of the cliff could actually be fortified. Whether it was some archers or some rolling stones and kerosene, it would be a devastating blow to the enemy. But it was a pity that the people of Orir were generally a little stubborn, or rather, they emphasized on fighting the enemy head-on. Most of the time, there was no strategy at all. Both sides would line up in a battle formation and fight the enemy head-on. It was the same even in a siege. They basically did not build other buildings outside the walls, and they did not know what a barbican was. He secretly made up his mind. After repelling the barbarians' attack, he would definitely dig 2 tunnels on both sides of the cliff, and then station 30 archers and 20 strong men who would be responsible for throwing stones down. When that time came, anyone who wanted to cause trouble would have to think twice about the price they would have to pay. Looking at the barbarians roaring towards them, Anthony took a deep breath and asked in a low voice, "The enemy's attack might be very fierce. Do you think we still need to prepare flour now?" "No, no need. I just happen to have a spell that can buy us some time. It should be enough to hold on until the reinforcements arrive," Andre said as he took 2 steps forward and stared at the barbarians who were about to step over the trench using ladders. The corner of his mouth raised slightly, and a playful smile appeared on his face. Then, without hesitation, he raised his hands and began to chant loudly. The spell that was full of magic began to reverberate around the walls. His 10 nimble fingers kept moving in the air, and soon, a complicated spell structure was formed. With a contemptuous smile on his face, he stretched out a finger that glowed with green light and lightly tapped. In an instant, a ball of dark green gas flew down from the castle and exploded in the middle of the barbarians who were about to climb the walls. Boom! Rank 3 Arcane Technique. Stinking Cloud. Activate. Target inhaled a large amount of poisonous gas and vomited. Target has fainted after inhaling a large amount of poisonous gas. The target lost balance due to vomiting and fell to his death. You have received 70 experience points. Attention! The poisonous gas cloud is spreading with the wind. In an instant, countless information flashed through their vision. The fearless barbarian warriors had finally experienced the power of biological weapons. They vomited so much that they almost fainted. In just a few seconds, hundreds of warriors had collapsed on the ground, let alone attack. Large patches of green, foul-smelling gas moved with the wind and continued to spread to the back. More and more people joined in the vomiting and fainting group. Because it was too crowded, many barbarians vomited on their companions. All kinds of sour smells instantly had a wonderful chemical reaction with the stinky cloud, and the entire valley was filled with a nauseating smell. Good heavens! What kind of spell is this? It's too disgusting. Anthony muttered to himself as he pinched his nose, his face turning green. Even though the castle was very high from the ground and the wind was blowing downwards, the poisonous gas did not reach him. However, the combination of the stench and vomit still made his stomach churn. Many of the soldiers behind him had similar reactions, and some of them could not help but lean against the wall and vomit their dinner. Stinking Cloud, a standard rank 3 Arcana technique. Even though it doesn't have much killing power, it's a very good control spell. If we have enough arrows, none of these barbarians will be able to leave alive, Andre explained as he pinched his nose. He had not expected this spell to be so powerful, especially when it was blown by the wind. Its area of effect had increased by more than 20 times. From the reactions of the enemy, it was obvious that it targeted the olfactory nerves. Just a little bit of it would cause intense discomfort. Even though it did not cause any substantial damage, it was definitely a great tool to control the situation. Looking at the Linton City reinforcements that were getting closer and closer, Anthony sighed slightly and asked, "How long does this spell last? 1 minute? 10 minutes? Andre shook his head with a smile. "You're too greedy. Large-scale spells like this don't last very long. With my current level as a wizard, it can last for half a minute at most, but the nausea will last for another 12 seconds to half a minute." Before he could finish speaking, a large black shadow suddenly leapt from outside, raising its hand to throw a flying axe. "Careful!" Anthony shouted, waving his flaming long sword in an attempt to knock the axe away. However, his movements were too slow, and he only managed to touch it a little. It was not enough to change the trajectory of the axe. The flying axe flashed with a cold light, heading straight for Andre's head. He had no time to think. Relying on his outstanding reflexes and nimble hands, he suddenly dodged to the side. The flying axe pierced through the invisible barrier of the wizard armor, whistling past the side of his face. Just as he thought he had dodged, the spinning axe smashed into his shoulder, sending a wave of intense pain to his brain. Ah! Andre screamed in agony as he was smashed to the ground by the huge force, his face full of pain. The tight threads of the flame protective robe barely blocked the axe from piercing into his body, but the huge impact could not be offset. His collarbone and shoulder blade were all shattered in an instant, and his entire shoulder was crippled. Ah, wizard, you're dead. I, Ogre King, will chop off your head today. The 2-meter-tall man roared angrily as soon as he landed. Several soldiers rushed up to attack, but they were all chopped in half by the huge axe in the blink of an eye. His innate talent of brute strength was used to its fullest. Even Anthony, who was blessed with bull strength, was directly knocked away. It took him a lot of effort to stabilize himself, not to mention the ordinary soldiers who had not even reached professional level. Chapter 126. Asterisk whoosh. 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 Asterisk sharp arrows that glinted with cold light were like shooting stars in the night sky, heading straight for the vital parts of the barbarian warrior's body. Ogwang laughed maniacally and didn't even try to dodge. He tensed up all the muscles in his body, allowing all the arrows to pierce into his chest. He then opened his mouth and roared, "Come on, you despicable cowards! I am the king of barbarians. I've never been afraid of any challenge, and I've never been afraid of your evil spells. Hee, I really don't know whether to praise your bravery or ignorance." Andre endured the pain and crawled up from the ground, letting out a cold laugh. Although his injuries weren't light, it was nothing compared to the barbarian who had been hit by more than 10 poisonous arrows. One had to know that the poison of the aconite grass was so strong that it wasn't something that could be resisted with just one's physique, unless one's life essence had undergone a huge leap. Normally, such a situation would only happen to warriors, druids, and priests above rank 12. This guy in front of him obviously hadn't reached the level of being immune to poison, which meant that the moment he was hit by the arrow, the god of death had already descended. "Are you insulting me?" Ogwang asked with a frown. With his knowledge and wisdom, he couldn't discern the bitter sarcasm in this sentence. He even felt that this was a praise for his bravery from the enemy. It had to be said that these barbarian warriors were simple and frank and didn't know how to hide their thoughts. They were definitely the kind of people who were willing to sacrifice themselves for their friends. However, their only flaw was that they were too violent and barbaric. They also looked down on those who cultivated the land, thinking that it was a sign of weakness. In the dictionary of barbarians, it was natural for the strong to bully the weak, so they didn't have any psychological burden when it came to pillaging. Seeing that the tall barbarian couldn't understand his words, Andre immediately lost the mood to tease him. He shook his head lightly. "No, I'm praising your bravery. You should know that not everyone dares to use their muscles to block sharp arrows." Upon hearing the word bravery, Ogwang immediately laughed heartily. "Ha ha ha ha. As the leader of the Shifts tribe, of course I'm brave. Even if you're just a despicable magus, you still have good eyesight. For the sake of this sentence, I'll let you die a quick death. The bravery I'm talking about is different from the bravery you're talking about. You might not know, but those arrows have been dipped in the poison of the aconite grass. Now, the poison has spread to your entire body along with your blood. Don't you feel your heart beating faster and slower?" Andre used an extremely calm tone to say those words that made everyone's hair stand on end. Moreover, the light in his eyes was like the calm surface of a lake, as if he was a meticulous wise man who had everything in his hands. Aconite was a famous plant in Orire. Throughout history, countless famous people have been poisoned to death by it. Even ignorant farmers knew that aconite could kill people in a very short period of time. The barbarians had always regarded it as a curse from the gods because of its strong vitality. Once it overflowed in the forest, it would cause a large number of herbivores to die. To them, there was nothing scarier than this anger. Anger that was like a volcanic eruption. Barbarians had always advocated fair battles and were filled with disgust and contempt for methods such as poisoning. Therefore, Ogawang's breathing instantly became hurried. The muscles all over his body began to congeal blood, and the veins on his neck and ligaments bulged. The hatred in his eyes had already solidified. Without a doubt, his anger had reached its peak, and he planned to stimulate all of his potential. Even if he died, he would kill the magus who used such despicable methods. In fact, due to living in the harsh environment of forests and wilderness for a long time, every adult barbarian had a terrifying ability. When they encountered danger or were extremely excited, their bodies would secrete a type of hormone that would make them extremely terrifying in a short period of time. Regardless of whether it was strength, agility, or willpower, they would all be greatly enhanced. Obviously, this was the precursor to activating the berserk ability. However, the poison had already corroded the main organs of the body, so the activation was slower. Andre sighed as he looked at the barbarian warrior, who was glaring angrily at him. The faster your blood flows, the faster the poison will spread. In a few more minutes, your heart will start to show signs of cardiac arrest. It's not too late to stop now. I have a way to detoxify the poison. Even though the barbarians had launched an attack on the valley and even caused many casualties, he did not resent them at all. On the contrary, he admired their bravery and fearlessness, and admired their simplicity and straightforwardness. This was just like how stupid people mostly admired smart people, and smart people also liked people who were relatively simple-minded. As for smart people and smart people, they might admire each other or even have a special relationship of being enemies and friends, but in the end, fierce competition would erupt. They would want to beat their opponents and prove that they were the best. Andre did not want to kill the barbarians at all. Otherwise, he would not have let go of a chance to obtain countless experience points. After all, these guys had been deceived, and they had no choice but to plunder in order to survive. Moreover, they only targeted professional soldiers and adult males, and never took the initiative to attack women and children. Thus, he wanted to try and see if he could turn enemies into friends, and at the same time, ask who the mastermind was. Unfortunately, although his idea was good, he had underestimated the barbarian's importance to honor. The muscles on O Wang's body suddenly expanded, and his eyes were bloodshot as he roared, "Die! Magi who use witchcraft and poison. No one can tarnish my honor, and no one can make the great Shift tribe lower their noble heads." As soon as he finished speaking, he fell into endless madness. He swung his huge two-handed axe and launched a violent attack. A guard holding a tower shield was smashed into pieces in the blink of an eye, and 2 soldiers were sent flying with a kick. The terrifying strength was simply unstoppable. Only Anthony, who had been blessed with bull's strength, staggered and parried twice. After a slight sigh, Andre unhurriedly completed the rank 2 arcane spell Flash Powder and directly released a dazzling golden light that blinded the eyes of the barbarian warrior. He quickly moved a few steps to the side to avoid the huge axe that was coming down on him, and then released the rank 0 arcane spell Tremor Shock, aiming at the opponent's knee. Chapter 127. An energy beam instantly struck Ogre Wong's knee. The electric current caused him to twitch and lose his balance. He fell to the ground with a plop. His helmet rolled to the side due to the impact, revealing a head of thick golden hair. As a man who had always been rational, Andre knew that he had offended this arrogant barbarian leader. Therefore, he had to kill him. If he didn't, there would be endless trouble in the future. So he took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and cast the level 1 arcane spell, Magic Missile. 3 beams of light created by magic energy streaked across the air and hit Andre's head, which was protected by the helmet. Bang! 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 Rank 1 Arcane Spell. Magic Missile activated. Missile hit target's head, dealing 5 points of damage. Missile hit target's head, dealing 3 points of damage. Missile hit target's head, dealing 4 points of damage. Target's head is severely damaged, entering a state of coma. Ogwang's head was like a rotten watermelon. Brain matter mixed with blood flowed out, and he fell into a state of coma. His body was still convulsing due to his berserk ability. At the same time, the poison of the aconite grass began to take effect. Even if a high-grade priest was present to cast a divine healing spell, he wouldn't be able to be saved. Without any hesitation, Andre used his uninjured arm to draw his mithril scimitar. He swung the scimitar down and cut off Ogwang's head. 1,200 experience points went into his bag. Now, he had 12,700 experience points. He was only 300 experience points away from his goal of becoming a rank 7 wizard. After doing all this, he gently wiped the blood off his weapon and put it back into its sheath. When he raised his head again, he found that everyone's eyes were filled with shock. Even the soldiers of Lincoln City, who were originally unconvinced, had changed their expressions. There was a trace of reverence in their fear. Anthony took 2 steps forward and bowed very formally. He then said in a slightly excited tone, "Sir, please allow me to represent everyone here to congratulate you on killing a powerful barbarian leader." The Shift's tribe was one of the strongest tribes in the border forest, and Ogwang was also the strongest barbarian leader in the forest. Under his leadership, these fellows often attacked the surrounding villages and towns. Lincoln City once issued a warrant for their arrest, and anyone who can eliminate them will receive a huge reward. You're overthinking it. I didn't wipe them out. The number of barbarians that died at our hands didn't exceed 500. The ones who really wiped them out were the reinforcements from Lincoln City. Henry pointed at the feudal knights who were charging in formation in front of the castle. The effects of the stinking cloud spell had already worn off, but the barbarians had yet to fully recover from their vomiting, so they were crushed by the powerful feudal knights. They were cut into countless pieces, and the infantrymen behind them swarmed forward. Anyone who dared to resist was instantly pierced by several spears. Even though the barbarians who worshipped bravery tried their best to resist, they were still no match for a fully armed army. This was especially so for the powerful knights on their horses. They could often kill several barbarian warriors with a single burst of speed. The suppression of equipment, training, and profession level was vividly displayed at this moment. Looking down at the soldiers who were cleaning up the battlefield and taking captives, Anthony smiled and explained, "No, they just picked up a ready-made bargain. According to the laws of Lincoln City, you are the one who contributed the most in this battle. Ogwang's head is also very valuable. If you don't want the glory, I can help you exchange it for gold coins later." Exchange it for gold coins? Andre glanced at the head with a ferocious expression at his feet. He couldn't think of anyone who would spend a large sum of money on such a thing. After all, the military of Lincoln City didn't calculate their merits based on the number of heads they killed. Moreover, most of the high-ranking officers were nobles and wealthy merchants. They didn't care about a few thousand gold coins at all. It seems like you don't quite understand the way the nobles of the Green Sea Alliance behave. Please believe me when I say that this head can be sold for at least 6,000 to 8,000 gold coins. If you meet a young man who is extremely thirsty for glory, then the price can be raised by 10% or so. Anthony lowered his voice and spoke meaningfully. He had been in the circle of nobles for 6 to 7 years, and had long since seen all kinds of exchanges of benefits. He had even personally acted as the middleman a few times. He was already very familiar with it. You mean to say that this head can bring glory to certain people or families and help them raise their status? As a transmigrator who came from an era of information explosion, Andre immediately thought of the behind-the-scenes transactions of the past. A trace of understanding appeared on his face. Anthony nodded lightly. That's right. Wealth, reputation, and a complicated network of relationships. All of these together form a noble family. Killing a notorious barbarian leader is a great honor for any noble child. It's also a capital. So many people are willing to go bankrupt to obtain it. I see. I'm a wizard, and I don't need any glory. Please sell it for a good price, and the commission will be 5%. Is that all right? Andre quickly adjusted his mentality and even offered some benefits. He knew that doing such a thing required a certain amount of risk, so it was only natural for him to take a commission. Shoulders were common in the developed linen city, and 5% was already a very high price. No need. Miss Chloe is safe this time, and I'll definitely be rewarded by Countess Anastasia when I return. Perhaps I'll even have a chance to become a squire of an apprentice knight. After 2 more years of experience, I'll be a true noble knight. All of this is thanks to you. Besides, with Miss Chloe's attitude towards you. Anthony's eyes immediately flashed with an ambiguous look. Andre immediately felt a slight headache at the thought of the overly infatuated noble girl. Although it was a wonderful thing to maintain an intimate relationship with a young and beautiful girl, it wasn't so wonderful if he had to bear other responsibilities. To be honest, ever since he knew that Chloe was a huge trouble, the first thing he thought of was to stay away from her. However, after tonight's battle, he was afraid that everyone would think that he was the boyfriend of this girl from a prominent family. Otherwise, why would a normal wizard save the lives of more than 2,000 barbarian warriors for a stranger? Chapter 128. The members of the Sorcerers' Association were granted immunity from the law. They could even turn around and run away when the situation was unfavorable to them on the battlefield. They did not have to care about the so-called military discipline, and the ruler would not pursue the matter either, as they were the most valuable asset of Linton City. They were also the foundation of the city's prosperity. Following the large number of barbarians being tied up by the army of Lincoln City, the curtains of the battle in front of the Two-A's Valley finally came to an end. Even though 2/3 of the 200 soldiers were lost and 4 of Crowley's guards died, they were still victorious. As for the peasants who were recruited as a precaution, it was just a false alarm, and they didn't really participate in the battle. As for the slave soldiers from the Grassland Kingdom, their performance was outstanding. Whether it was their battle prowess or obedience, they were impeccable. It was hard to imagine that they didn't care about their status as slaves, wholeheartedly thinking for their masters. Their loyalty was quite high. It was no wonder that so many nobles and merchants in Linton City liked to keep slaves. After cleaning up the corpses and bloodstains on the castle, Anthony ordered the drawbridge to be lowered, the iron gate to be pulled open, and the gates opened slowly. He personally led his men out to greet the barbarians. A knight in shining armor dismounted from his horse and took off his helmet, revealing a square face full of whiskers. He didn't say a word before giving the leader a bear hug and laughing. Ha ha ha! Old friend, you're really lucky to be able to withstand the attacks of so many barbarian warriors. Arlen, so it was you who led the team. I was wondering how the reinforcements came so quickly. It wasn't me who was able to withstand the barbarians' attacks. It was the lord of this place, Wizard Andre. If it wasn't for him, we would have been wiped out long ago. Anthony smiled bitterly as he explained what happened. Of course, he skipped over the part about the Mariel family's secret. He only mentioned that Lieutenant Wilson and a dozen other officers were demon worshippers, and that these people had hidden the original military items in the castle, making it extremely difficult to defend the castle. He also didn't forget to mention the fact that O Wong had been killed. After listening to the leader's description, Arlen instantly became serious. He hurriedly lowered his voice and asked, "Oh gods, is Miss Chloe all right? Lady Anastasia specifically told me to save her no matter what the situation is. Also, are you sure that the officers of the garrison are members of Toxic Tailhook? This is no small matter. Miss Chloe is fine. She's well protected. She's just a little frightened. As for your doubts, I can guarantee with my integrity that they are absolutely true." The former would listen to the spellcaster's orders and would never attack humans. The latter, on the other hand, were completely subservient to their instincts. As soon as they sensed danger, they would immediately attack. It was obvious that the hellhound in front of them belonged to the former. It had only appeared to warn everyone to stay away, and had no intention of attacking. That's right. It was summoned by Sir Wizard. It played a huge role in the battle just now. Please step back and let me deal with it. Anthony took 2 steps forward and lightly knocked on the door. Your Excellency, the Knights of Linton City are here. They would like to ask you about what happened. Is it convenient for you now? A few seconds later, Andre's voice sounded from the door. Please come in. The hellhound guarding the door sensed the intentions of its summoner and immediately turned to hide in the darkness, faithfully carrying out every order. Anthony pushed open the door and gestured for the knights behind him to enter. Arlen's heart was burning with anxiety, and he couldn't be bothered to be courteous. He walked straight into the room and saw Andre's bare upper body. Andre was in the middle of setting his bones. The scars on his upper body were shocking, especially the giant bite marks. It was a miracle that Andre had survived until now. Chapter 129. Even though the effects were not bad, their skills were not as good. After all, they could not be expected to be like the doctors on Earth. Pain was unavoidable. Andre dragged his exhausted body and sat down on a chair. He sighed. I'm sure you can see that I'm not in good condition. My head is still dizzy from overexerting myself. What I need most now is rest. If you have any questions, ask them now. Arlen hurriedly placed a hand on his chest and bowed deeply. I'm very sorry to disturb your rest at this time, but as a knight, I must investigate the ins and outs of this matter. After all, the Venomous Tail is not an ordinary cult. They are evil and crazy, and every time they act, they cause great destruction. For the safety of Lincoln City, please hold on for a little longer. I understand. If these fellows can control a local garrison, they must have infiltrated the nobles. In my opinion, the pirate incident, Chloe's lady being robbed, someone in the city leaking information, and today's barbarian attack. Everything is premeditated and planned. An invisible mastermind wants to stir up a storm in the Green Sea Alliance. If you really want to investigate, it's best not to limit yourself to Lincoln City. Gather information about recent incidents in other cities, and you'll soon find some clues. Andre stood up and walked out. Anyone who wasn't an idiot would know the severity of the situation. As for how the Dukes would deal with this matter, it was not up to him. Even if the sky fell, there would be a tall man to hold it up. He just had to be responsible for the safety of the people around him. As a transmigrator who came from the era of information explosion, he could clearly feel that a huge conspiracy was shrouding this rich land. The person behind the scenes must be planning something big. The things that happened now were just the appetizer. It wouldn't be long before more and more serious things happened. Seeing Andre leave the room, Arlen hurriedly stood up and shouted at his back, "Thank you very much for your advice. I will report it to the Dukes without missing a word. Also, it's best if you wait a little longer. My subordinates are counting the spoils of war. According to the laws of Lincoln City, you contributed the most in this battle, so you can receive 70% of the total value of the spoils, including the barbarian prisoners. I've already entrusted everything to Anthony. If you have any questions, just ask him directly." Andre waved his hand without looking back and walked straight to the room where Chloe, Elsa, and the little girl were. He had to comfort these frightened women and girls before he went to sleep. Watching Andre's figure gradually disappear at the end of the dark corridor, Arlen squinted his eyes and muttered to himself, "What a strange person. He doesn't seem to be interested in politics at all. Besides President Boris, I've never seen a mage with so many wounds on his body. He's like a hunter who frequently enters and exits the forest." In Lincoln City, many mages with noble titles actively participated in various affairs, trying to expand their influence as much as possible to build a good foundation for their descendants. After all, being a mage was a profession with very strict requirements for talent. It didn't mean that the descendants of a mage in a family would be able to become mages. In comparison, noble titles were different. Generally speaking, as long as they didn't violate the laws of Lincoln City, they could be passed down from generation to generation. That was why many mages who couldn't progress would focus on politics instead of magic research. After a long time, it would give people the misconception that mages were also interested in fighting for power. In fact, Mages with real potential wouldn't waste their energy on scheming against nobles and merchants. To them, arcane magic was the only thing they could rely on in the world. While exploring endless mysteries, a mage's power would gradually increase, and they would eventually reach the goal of delaying death or even immortality. It was obvious that Andre belonged to this type of person. Although he'd taken the initiative to integrate himself into the circle of nobles, he didn't intend to waste too much time in this aspect. He only wanted a more convenient identity, and other than that, he wanted to earn money to pay for the high costs of learning magic. He didn't care about the internal power struggles of Lincoln City, so there was no need for him to maintain a close relationship with these feudal knights. Geniuses are always a little different, old friend. You'd better not take the performance of mages whose power has stagnated as the norm. As far as I know, none of the truly senior members of the Mage Association excessively participate in politics. Moreover, Sir Andre is only 14 years old this year, and he's already able to withstand the siege of more than 2,000 barbarians in an intense battle. He's even killed the leader of a rank 8 barbarian. Can you imagine how bright his future is? Anthony's tone was very emotional. After the fierce battle just now, he finally understood why Countess Anastasia didn't stop Miss Chloe from mingling with an unknown person, and instead added fuel to the fire behind the scenes. It was because Andre had been too calm in the face of danger and death. He was so calm that he didn't seem like a youth at all. This kind of reaction was definitely not something an ordinary person could have, and was very much like the outstanding descendants of some legendary ancient family. However, he didn't know that Andre's fearlessness in the face of danger wasn't because he'd been trained, but because he'd truly experienced too many life and death situations. His nerves had long since become abnormally resilient. Not to mention a group of barbarian warriors who hadn't even charged up the castle. Even if the castle was breached by the enemy, he would still calmly bring the 3 women to hide in the forest behind the basin. He had a few copies of invisibility scrolls in a scroll box, and the barbarians who knew nothing about arcane magic couldn't really threaten his life. Naturally, he wasn't that nervous. A rank 8 barbarian leader? Arlen's mouth was agape in shock. After a long while, he asked in disbelief, "Oh my gods, you couldn't have killed Wong, could you?" Anthony took a deep breath and nodded vigorously. "That's right. Wong is dead. You can't even imagine the scene at that time. He was like a god of war looking down on everyone, easily killing several soldiers. I didn't even last a few seconds before I was knocked to the ground. However, Sir Andre only used a few spells to play with him in the palm of his hand. In the end, he didn't even have a chance to retaliate before his head was chopped off. Chapter 130. How is that possible? Barbarian warriors' strong muscles are naturally resistant to magic. I remember a wizard once told me that a rank 3 arcane spell had to be used to kill King Ojberg. Does this mean that Sir Andre is already a rank 5 wizard? Arlen couldn't control his emotions as he cried out involuntarily. A 14-year-old official wizard was already shocking enough. A 14-year-old rank 5 wizard could be considered a monster. In the records of Linton City's Mage Guild, although it was extremely rare for a 14-year-old to become a first-rank mage, there were at least 1 or 2. However, there wasn't a single 14-year-old first-rank mage, let alone Linton City. Even if one searched all the cities in the Green Sea Alliance, they wouldn't find a 14-year-old first-rank mage. Mages who had mastered level 3 arcane spells weren't cabbages that could be found anywhere. They were the ones that the rulers valued the most, because regardless of whether it was the fireball magic or lightning magic that could deal area of effect damage, or the acceleration magic that could greatly increase one's combat strength, they could all increase the strength of an army. Think about it. In the era of cold weapons, what would happen if dozens of cannonballs were fired at a group of people? Think about it again. If a group of heavy cavalry ran with the speed of light cavalry, how spectacular would the scene be when they scattered the enemy in the blink of an eye? Most importantly, he had already become a 5th rank mage at the age of 14. In the future, you would at least become a 10th rank great mage. Even a duke would have to salute him and call him a great mage. In any city, he would undoubtedly receive the highest level of treatment. Just as Arlen couldn't accept this reality, another relatively young knight took 2 steps forward and whispered, "Sir, I attended a magic class a few years ago. According to the classification of spells, the Hellhound is a rank 3 summon creature. This means that the wizard who summoned it must have mastered a rank 3 arcane spell. The green clouds we saw in the distance should be a rank 3 arcane spell, Stinking Cloud. You mean that young man Andre is a rank 5 wizard?" Arlen couldn't help but tremble slightly. The young knight nodded lightly. "I'm afraid so. I also heard that President Boris of the Association of Mages has a completely different attitude towards him compared to the other members. In just a few days, the two of them had a few private conversations. All right, looks like another big shot will appear in Linton City soon." Arlen stroked the stubble on his chin, a bitter smile on his face. Even though he was a level 5 warrior and level 3 feudal knight, his status in Linton City was not low. Not only did he obtain a large amount of land and property, he was also a knight captain and had the right to lead his own troops in a battle. This was something only 3 knight captains and 1 head knight captain in the entire city had. It could be said that it was extremely glorious, but it was nothing compared to a great mage. At present, there were only 3 great wizards above rank 10 in the city, including President Boris. One of them had gone out 5 years ago and still hadn't returned. The other was hiding on the top floor of the association's Wizard Tower, researching puppet technology. Every one of them had a status no lower than a duke. If the 3 of them worked together, they could even force the council to change their policies and laws. On the Oleo continent, anyone who had great power, as long as they weren't crazy lunatics, would receive a corresponding status. This was because the rulers feared their power and wanted to use power and wealth to bring them into the system, making them the beneficiaries of the system. This way, when the system was challenged, these people with terrifying power would come out and crush the troublemakers into pieces. It was because of this that the feudal system hadn't collapsed in this world for many years. The rate of increase in productivity was also very slow. The nobles held the power of life and death and didn't want any change at all. The people at the bottom of society were in a precarious situation. They desperately wanted change, but they didn't have enough power. Thus, a strange ruling system was formed. Seeing his old friend's dejected expression, Anthony couldn't help but smile and shake his head. He lowered his voice and said, "Buddy, the head of Oak King is in my hands right now. Sir Andre doesn't want this honor. Say no more. I'll pay 10,000 gold coins. With this honor, the city hall will definitely give me a hereditary title." Arlen didn't even think about it before offering a high price. He knew very well that a knight captain status was noble, but it couldn't be hereditary. It was far less useful than a real noble title, even if it was just a small knight. In fact, many kingdoms on the continent were more or less the same. Knights belonged to the lowest level of nobility. Although they could be hereditary in theory, they had to ensure that one of the successors could become a knight. Otherwise, the title and territory could be confiscated. Most knights who had just climbed up from the bottom had a lifelong wish to become a knight, and they were willing to sacrifice everything for it. "No problem, follow me. Oak King's head has already been packed with lime. You can take it away now." Anthony obviously knew what was on his old friend's mind, and he happily nodded in agreement. The other young knights were also eager to give it a try. They seemed to be quite interested in the head, but Arlen glared at them in the end. Not long after, Anthony returned with a square wooden box. He opened it without saying a word, revealing a slightly damaged head. Heavens! How could Oak King's head be so damaged? A young knight cried out involuntarily. He couldn't believe that this powerful barbarian warrior had died so miserably. There were actually 3 large holes in his well-protected head. Arlen crouched down and gently fiddled with the head with his iron gloves. He sucked in a breath of cold air and then explained with a wry smile, This is the result of a magic missile. Only a true 5th rank mage can shoot 3 at once. Old friend, I think we should have a good talk. Haha, it's my pleasure. Come, friend, let's discuss the future together. After all, not everyone has the chance to meet a rising big shot. Anthony bowed slightly with a smug smile on his face. Chapter 131. Andre didn't know that his rapid increase in level had attracted the attention of many people. He went straight to the door of the room on the 2nd floor of the castle. He suddenly stopped, turned around, and whispered to Taflin, "Eunice, why didn't you take advantage of the barbarian's attack to escape? Run away? Why would I run away?" The half-demon stroked her fiery red hair and asked in return. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly, and her eyes flashed with a hint of playfulness. Her tail kept swaying behind her, and even the most ordinary linen dress couldn't hide her curvaceous figure. Even if she didn't use her charm, talent, it was enough to excite most male creatures. As a man with normal physiological functions, Andre naturally had some reaction, but because of his strong self-control, he didn't show it. He just stood there and stared into her eyes. He knew very well that the woman with demon blood in front of him had been acting very strange since she was captured. She didn't try to escape, nor did she have any intention of resisting. Every order she was given was executed very well, and no one could find any fault with her. But it was this that made him even more suspicious and worried, because everyone knew that because of the demon blood in Tafrin, most of them were very cunning and cruel, so he wanted to figure out her purpose and thoughts. The two of them looked at each other like this for a full minute. In the end, Eunice couldn't take it anymore. She sighed helplessly and explained, "I'm telling the truth. Do you think you can get freedom after running away? Too naive. Except for a few areas full of chaos and evil, every city and country is full of vigilance and malice towards people with otherworldly blood like me. As for those mages, they're trying to figure out the secret hidden in my body. Instead of being frightened outside, it's better to be by your side. At least you have a good heart, and you can guarantee my safety." Although this explanation was reasonable, Andre had always been very scheming. He still asked in a suspicious tone, "Is that all? Why do I feel like you're hiding something else?" "All right, I admit that I'm still interested in your blood that's filled with magical energy. After drinking it last time, I discovered that it can actually replenish and evolve my bloodline. As long as you're willing to provide me with a small cup every month, I'm willing to pledge my loyalty to you and become your capable assistant and servant. How about that?" Seeing that her previous words did not work, Eunice had no choice but to speak her true thoughts. She knew very well that it was impossible for her to truly integrate into human society. Therefore, if she wanted to live comfortably, she had to pledge her loyalty to an organization or individual in exchange for their protection. A young mage with a bright future who could provide blood full of magic power was definitely the first choice, especially since he did not show any prejudice or discrimination against mixed blood demons, nor did he show any fanatical interest in research. In fact, in Oraire, the Tafrin were basically a group of vagrants. On one hand, it was because of their own reasons, and on the other hand, it was because of deep-rooted discrimination. Almost nobody was willing to live with the Tafrin for a long time. Even if they cooperated for a short time, it was only for the sake of benefits. The Tafrin would often end up in a pitiful state. Only very few Tafrin would be able to find someone to rely on or establish their own organization, which would allow them to live peacefully until they died a natural death. One of the most important reasons why Eunice joined the pirates was because she had no place to go. Although she had excellent abilities in martial arts techniques, she was unable to find a place where she could sleep peacefully. Although the pirates had accepted the Tafrin family, they were only using each other. If she became careless, the pirates wouldn't mind capturing her and selling her off as a slave. This was the tragedy of being a half-demon. Compared to the tieflings and dragon bloodlines who had devil bloodlines, half-demons were just like rats that everyone wanted to beat up. The guards didn't even need to follow any laws when killing these half-demons. They would be executed wherever they were caught. Not only would the passers-by not interfere, they would even applaud. Andre had read about this in books, so he knew just how terrible the living conditions of the Taffrin family were. He furrowed his eyebrows slightly, and there was obvious hesitation in his eyes. As a mage, he was well aware of the value of a mixed-blood demon. As long as they were properly trained, they would immediately become a qualified warrior, warlock, or thief. However, when he thought about how this woman had whipped so many innocent people to death for no reason, he couldn't help but feel a sense of disgust. In his opinion, killing soldiers, professionals, and adventurers wasn't a big deal. After all, these people were all combatants who chose to step into danger. However, killing ordinary civilians, sailors, and merchants was a bit too much. Not to mention whipping them to death was an extremely cruel act. After thinking it over, Andre felt that he should give her a chance to correct herself. So, he nodded slightly and said, "I accept your conditions. But before that, I have to make one thing clear. Since you're willing to become my servant, then you'll have to do as I say. Any actions of your own will be severely punished, especially those that harm others for no reason. Don't worry. Although I kind of like whipping prisoners, I'm not stupid enough to do anything to ordinary civilians. Every person I whipped to death had a reason." "If you don't believe me, you can go and investigate," Eunice replied with a playful expression as she grabbed her own tail. "Reason?" Andre raised his eyebrows. "Are you implying that these people deserved it?" As a soul that came from the era of information explosion, he had seen too many bastards who looked bright on the surface, but were full of evil tricks in his previous life. He immediately thought of many possibilities. However, Eunice obviously didn't want to answer. She only smiled mysteriously. "Go and investigate yourself. You'll soon have a deep understanding of the various cities of the Green Sea Alliance." Seeing that the half-demon wasn't willing to say anything, Andre didn't force it. He just shrugged indifferently. "Forget it. I don't have the time to waste on this. Just don't do such things in the future. Also, you can now swear your loyalty. I'll leave a secret imprint on your forehead, so you can move freely around Lincoln City." In Oraire, being a servant of nobles, mages, and merchants was not shameful. In fact, it was a job that everyone envied. Not only were they protected by their masters, even their basic necessities were of a higher grade. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.